Okay, it is 6 p.m. on Monday, December 11th. So I am going to call to order this meeting of the Winooski City Council. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance led by Deputy Mayor Renner.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, first, next is agenda review. Any concerns about the order this evening?
Nope.
Okay. Next up is public comment. So if you're here for an item on the agenda, if you can wait, please wait till we reach that. I'll invite public comment for every agenda item. But if you have something that you want to share not related to this evening's agenda, now would be the time. Anyone in here? Anyone on Zoom? You can use the chat or raise hand feature. Okay, seeing none, we can move on to the consent agenda. We have just the City Council and Liquor Control Board minutes from our last meeting, December 4th, and accounts payable December 7th. Any questions, concerns from council?
No.
No.
Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Bryn, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries, thank you. Moving on to council reports. Would you like to start, Aurora?
Sure. All right. So I wanted to give a reminder that the Safe, Healthy, Connected People Commission will meet tomorrow at 6:30. This is a virtual only meeting over Zoom. The Winooski Memorial Library Committee will be presenting. So if you're interested in learning more about our city's small but mighty library, this is a great opportunity to tune in. Also, this week is the Inclusion and Belonging Commission, which is also virtual. It will be on Thursday at 6 p.m. The commission will be reviewing the roles of the ambassadors to the different other commissions to ensure that commissioners have the support they need to succeed in the goals for both the city and the commission. And I also wanted to note, as we're getting closer to town meeting day, I wanted to share with the council and the public that I am planning to seek re-election for another term on council.
Thank you. Bryn.
Sure. So the Infrastructure Commission will be meeting this month. Last week when we met, wasn't sure, but we will be meeting on Thursday the 21st. We're actually going to change from our normal location at the pool and instead be here in City Hall chambers, council chambers. And that will be to review the walk bike plan that was presented this past week for council comment. So the Infrastructure Commission will have a chance next week to review and add any other feedback that they may have. And then the next Winooski Bridge replacement meeting, public hearing, that's scheduled for Tuesday, January 23rd. The start time will be at 6:30 p.m. at the Winooski School Performing Arts Center. That's 60 Norman Street here in Winooski. That will be available in person or online for attendance. And that's all I have for the moment.
Thank you. I too would like to officially declare my intent to run for another term as mayor. I am up on the ballot this year. Other council reports. I have contacted a couple of our legislators about the local match funding for the bridge to keep that advocacy going, trying to reduce that for us. And the Planning Commission will be meeting this Thursday at 6:30 p.m. via Zoom to continue reviewing our land use regulations and the impacts of the Home Act, as well as this will be their first time in that work since we provided direction about trying to maximize those changes in support of priority housing.
Great.
Thomas.
In the theme of things, I also will be running for re-election on town meeting day. In terms of updates from downtown Winooski, we are meeting next week and haven't met since we last all gathered here. But there is an agenda item that downtown Winooski will be talking about later today, so we'll hear more from them at that point. And just to let everyone know, there's going to be some winter caroling in the city on Thursday, December 21st from 5 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. On the McKee's patio. If you are interested in joining or watching, it's open to all. Thank you.
The Winooski Housing Commission will be meeting on December 19th at 6 p.m. There's both an in-person and online option for those that'd like to meet remotely. Tonight we'll be discussing the ongoing work that the housing director has been doing for short-term rental regulations. And that's all I've got.
All right, thank you all. City updates, Elaine.
Yeah, so fiscal year 2025 budget discussion started last week, or at least the meat of it. Tonight we'll continue with staff budget presentations. Please do stick around for the capital improvement presentation. Join us to discuss the cost and upkeep of the city's vehicles, facilities, and other important municipal assets. Please ask questions and provide input on how you think our tax dollars should be spent. For the full schedule of budget meetings and information, please visit winooskivt.gov/FY25. That's as in fiscal year 25. And you can always send your questions between meetings to budget@winooskivt.gov. The City of Winooski is again part of the 2023 Operation Fire Cuffs annual toy drive for the UVM Children's Hospital. Every year, this special tradition brings joy to children in need, and we encourage residents to donate. Donations can be made at the Winooski Fire Department Monday through Thursday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and at Winooski City Hall from Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. That's until December 21st. And lastly, the Exit 16 Double Diamond Interchange Survey is out. The Vermont Agency of Transportation has completed the first phase of construction at the Colchester Exit 16 for 89. The first construction season required around-the-clock construction as crews restricted significant traffic impacts to nighttime hours. VTrans is seeking community feedback on Phase 1 construction impacts and project outreach. Please take 5 minutes to complete that survey at exit16ddi.vtransprojects.vermont.gov. A link to that survey is also available on our website. The survey will close on Friday, December 15th. If you have a question about the project that isn't on the survey, please email info@exit16ddi.vtransprojects.vermont.gov. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move into our regular items. First up for discussion approval, Inclusion and Belonging Commission appointments.
Good evening. So we are pleased to present two alternate applicants for tonight to be part of the Inclusion and Belonging Commission. This is Harley Rodriguez.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi.
Do you want to say
Okay.
a bit about it?
Hello, everyone. My name is Harley Rodriguez. I'm originally from the Bronx, New York. I moved here about 3 years ago and was pleasantly surprised by how warm and welcoming Winooski's been. I think I met you, Thomas, in one of our city events. And I joined the Inclusion and Belonging Commission because I believe that Winooski has already created a strong reputation for welcoming people from other countries, from other states, and I think in order to keep that reputation and to make it stronger, that I can hopefully bring a lens that can help with different initiatives. I do believe that Winooski is known as one of the most ethnically and culturally diverse cities in Vermont, but I think there is something to look at under a microscope is how do we retain people that come here, because Winooski is getting very expensive. And there aren't that much opportunities for mixed income housing, especially like when you look at buildings like in Winooski Falls Way and stuff like that. And it's seemingly similar to what's happening in the Bronx, in my home, where gentrification is happening, and I'm just gonna call it like it is. And I think that there is a way that you can do it responsibly, renovating different things, and bringing more innovation to the city, but at the same time, keeping it, that cultural fabric of it. And I think there needs to be a balance that is hard to find at times, but I think it's doable if you bring the community in more. So hopefully I can help with that. if there's anything that I can do, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for applying for the role and bringing your expertise. I really appreciated too in your application, you mentioned like using education to reduce discrimination and what you just said about like bringing the community in. More connection, the more people understand each other, the better, I think. So very happy to have you. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you so much for coming in so we could also meet you in person tonight.
Okay, thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having me. Yeah.
I just have a statement from Leo, who is our other applicant, as an alternate member. And so I'll just read this. My name is Leo Beebe, and I'm a junior at Winooski High School. I'm interested in participating on this committee because I would like to serve the community. As a student, I would be able to advise the committee on issues that are affecting Winooski's youth. I am interested in city government and in maximizing the potential of the community to expand on and improve opportunities that students support belonging.
Also very exciting to have a youth perspective coming to the table.
It's great.
Yeah.
Someone want to make a motion?
So moved.
Yeah, to approve the appointments.
Second.
Motion by Aurora, second by Bryn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. It's official.
you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are moving on to item B, and feel free to exit as you wish. This is on for discussion approval, the loan request from downtown Winooski. Elaine, are you going to start?
Yes.
Please join.
So council may recall that downtown Winooski's new executive director, Melissa Corbin, let you know during your September 18th, 2023 meeting about the $30,000 federal tax liability that she discovered when she took over. She and her board have worked on many ideas to get caught up, but have reached this option of last resort, I would call it. I did suggest that they ask the city for a loan. I normally wouldn't suggest that a nonprofit do that sort of thing. In this case, the relationship we have with downtown Winooski is unique. The city has a downtown designation that gives our community access to a long list of significant benefits. To keep a downtown designation requires a designated downtown organization. Downtown Winooski is that organization for us, and there really isn't a true alternative. Also, downtown Winooski provides services that would otherwise not be provided or would need to be provided by the city at probably a higher cost. So those include business support and community events. They also raise money to pay for those efforts themselves, in addition to the support that the city provides. So the request is for $36,000. $30,000 is to pay off that IRS debt without incurring more fees and penalties. And $6,000 is for emergency operating reserve, as I understand it, as they rebuild, and Melissa can correct me if I got that wrong.
That's correct.
And the city can afford this loan without risking our projects and needs for fund balance.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks for coming in, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate having you back in. As Elaine said, you had shared that you found these fiscal challenges previously as you came into the role. And the organization is an important partner with the city. Can you speak to, so Elaine shared like what the money is going to be used for, but like how you plan on bringing this organization back to being sustainable?
Well, that's a really big question. But I think that the way that I feel right now is kind of stuck in mud in not being able to do a really clear strategic plan, because every direction I've gone in, this tax debt has been a wall against me trying to figure out exactly how and where we want to move the organization forward. What I'd really like to do is get this behind us so that we can actually apply for grants. Every grant that I've gone after, this has been what's shot it down. And I really would like to be able to do philanthropic fundraising, which is one of the reasons that I'm hired, because that's something that I'm good at. But whenever I present a balance sheet to a potential funder, that liability that's sitting on there just makes it say you don't know how to run a business. And so I really would like to get this debt behind us and focus on why I was actually hired, which was to take a foundation and grow the organization, create organizational development, and get strong funding partners in place, both at the state level, hopefully at the federal level with USDA funding for the farmers market in the future, which was also rejected because of this tax debt this year. But at least it's written, so I can submit it again next May. And I'd really like us to get a really solid base of sponsors and annual donors. I spoke to a couple people who have donated in the past, and really why they stopped donating was because they just got really unclear about where their money was going. So this year I was able to put together every single community event that we did, the money that came in, the money that went out, and what the whole was, so that we can say we need $2,000 more to put Juneteenth on the way that we want it. Also this year we put together sponsorship packages which never existed before, so we can go out and ask community partners to support our events. So that's a long-winded way of me saying that I really would like to just move forward with a strategic plan in February. I want to hold a retreat with my board and get really clear goals and objectives and understand and track on a quarterly basis how we're meeting those. Right now, without a lack of plan, it's hard to give a really solid, clear answer to that question, and that's not me dodging it. It's just I'd really like to have a strategic plan in front of me and say, this is what we've developed as a board of directors and where we want to go and where we think are stretch goals and where are ones that we know that we can meet very easily. But as I sit here right now in December, we're not there yet.
That's fair. I think the context you just shared was also very helpful about why this is important in that process. Do other folks have questions?
So I did share a number of questions with Elaine beforehand that you were able to respond to, so thank you.
Hell of a team, of course.
Yeah, of course. I think some of my main questions are just terms and conditions as it relates to payment term, payment repayment timeline, potential risk of failure to repay. But I think that a lot of my concerns were alleviated from responses from the city manager and the team. I think I said it in September, I'll say it again, just thank you for the work that you've done to unearth this challenge and the work that you've done to date to help address and resolve it. So I do have a lot of confidence in the work that you're doing and how transparent you've been.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that. I think I've already addressed my points with city staff, and I think they'll address it in any of the terms and conditions with the loan payment. So I don't think I have anything else at the moment.
I don't have a question, but as always, just thank you for everything you do. I know that you did not want to have to come to this table again asking for something or delivering somewhat bad news. So I just want to stress, and Elaine kind of already touched on it, but this was really your last resort of trying to take care of this. And it's hard when you've put in such good work and have been like, yeah, you have this grant, except for this one thing. So it's really just important for you all to be able to take care of that debt. So thanks for laying it out so plainly for us and what you need.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We really did try everything, but you can't really go to a bank when you don't have any assets and ask for a loan. The Opportunities Credit. We tried. we got pretty far along in the process, and really thought that was going to be the answer. But I understood why they said no. So this is a bit of a leap of faith for you all, but I feel like, as you said, if we want the downtown designation to stay in place, this really feels like the last resort. I do also want to say that even if we put terms and conditions in that allow for a 5-year loan, if we are able to pay it before that, we will, of course. And if we are able to stabilize our income channels in a quicker time frame than what we've talked about, we will definitely make paying back the city a commitment. I think that I'm being conservative in saying it might take us 5 years to get there. I'm hopeful that it'll be sooner, but I wanted to be conservative in my estimate.
I appreciate that. We would be foregoing potential interest earnings to do this. I think the decision is that a risk worth what we get out of a successful downtown organization. For me, I think yes, it is. Are there any questions from members of the public? Judy. Oh.
I just
Can you hear?
Judy?
Sorry, would you be willing to come up here and speak into the microphone?
I just wonder, are you comfortable that your organization has a structure, like a board structure in place? Do you have a treasurer so you're gonna be able to know where you are at all times now?
Yes, yes.
Um,
We do have a very solid active board of directors in place, and we do have a treasurer who's a business owner here in the area.
Okay. And will the council be, or the city manager be requesting periodic updates on where they are during this period of time to make sure it's no surprises at the end?
Yeah, we get a financial report update at least annually already.
The great thing is it'll come out of QuickBooks going forward. So you'll be able to see and be able to capture and compare and contrast against things. So it won't be an Excel sheet. And it's also, we hired a forensic accountant to help us through this process, and we are retaining them on a monthly basis so that somebody's watching me, so that I have CPAs watching me, making
Okay.
sure that everything that I'm doing is legitimate. Every time that I've held this role in organizations in the past, it's always a really good idea to bring an outside accounting firm in, so especially when you're an employee of 1 or 1.5,
Right.
so that you have people that are looking over your
Yeah.
shoulder and helping you reconcile the books every month and
Right.
signing off on it.
Yep, checks and balances, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I guess that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your caring and interest.
You're welcome.
Anything else?
I don't think so. Yeah, really the fact that you can't access grant money and other funds, to me, just speaks to that this is hopefully getting you back to that place, which, you know, we're all excited to see.
Yeah, thank you for your patience. It's been a long road.
Okay, I am not hearing any great concerns, so perhaps someone would like to make a motion to approve the loan request from downtown Winooski.
So moved.
Second?
Do you mind authorizing
This one.
the check to,
Authorizing you to sign it, right?
for it to be issued, yeah?
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the loan request from downtown Winooski and for our city manager to authorize the payment?
I was looking at the line to see if it was good. So
Yes.
moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Thomas, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Okay, we are on to item C, the fiscal year 2025 budget presentation on the capital improvement plan.
Plug in to this. So that's good. Yeah. Or do you want
Wait, am I out of order here? No, this is correct. Okay.
Okay. I think Paul can do it from his side. Okay. Did you hear that?
John, yeah, we can do it one or two ways. John, you can join the Zoom meeting right now and share your screen, or I can just pull it up, no problem.
If possible, I would prefer to drive.
Standing by.
I'll log in quick.
Should be good to go, John. Just one more thing, make sure your laptop volume is all the way down.
Yep, all set. Great. Okay. Good evening. So I'm here to present the general fund capital plan for FY25. So this is a switch in the schedule. I think Safe Healthy Connected was originally scheduled tonight, and then fortunately our director there had some health issues, so I'm covering. So the general fund capital plan, this is actually new, so we haven't presented this as a separate budget since I've been here. And it's finally gotten to the point where I think it's worth spending some extra time to go through it. It's upwards of $1 million now, so, and it typically has gotten sort of pushed into the public works presentation, so it doesn't give you all a lot of time to review it and get into the details. So the other thing with this budget too, it's probably where you sort of have the most flexibility. It doesn't necessarily impact, salaries and current employees. It's our major capital assets. So there is some room here to sort of change what you all want to do. We will, obviously, we're providing recommendations, and there's existing debt that we have to pay for, but there is some room here to look at alternatives. So with that,
Also, it happens to be where your priority was this year, so.
yeah, correct. So I've broken this down into 3 categories. So the first bunch of slides is mainly getting into like intro, what is the capital plan, and just providing some background info. And then the second group of slides is really the projects and getting into some of the details. The third group is probably the most boring because that's more of the spreadsheets and like the budget numbers, but obviously very important. So most of you have probably seen this before, but just covering what is a capital asset and what is a capital budget. So we are specifically talking about the general fund, so those assets that are primarily paid for with property taxes. This is a 5-year sort of look ahead on how we either replace those assets or we purchase new assets or projects. And then the definitions are listed there. What is a capital asset? So, typically, as you can see in the photo, something like a tower truck, that is one of our major capital assets. It's going to have long-standing debt. It's typically not something we can pay for in 1 year. We've got to finance it. So that is kind of it's what you would expect a capital asset to be, is those major costs that the city has to take on. So just to give you kind of a ballpark feel for how much stuff do we have in capital assets, we looked at our values from the last audit. They're probably very conservative, to be honest, but so I've updated a couple of the general service items, specifically the streets items and the Winooski Bridge. That number was like 12 million, so for reference. So I think this is very, very, very conservative, but just to give you like a rough idea of like how much stuff do we own that's considered a capital asset. So it's right around 110 million. If we went through line by line to look at, okay, what if this building, for example, City Hall, I don't remember what it was listed as, but it was probably the purchase price or the construction price in 1970 is what's in there. If we were to rebuild this building today, like, it would be obviously much higher. So yeah, I would say 110, it could go, double that potentially if we did a really detailed look into it. So suffice to say, we have a lot of very expensive things.
What's the multiple? The bottom of the chart.
The assets are actually owned by multiple funds.
Yep.
It's things like the tower lights that are used for construction at night, but are also used by the water and wastewater department.
Thanks. Yeah, and we did exclude the O'Brien Community Center because that is not in the budget for FY25. I think that was listed in the audit for around 3 or 4 million, so that's not in this number. So high-level overview of the FY25 capital plan. And I'm using this term like base capital plan because back in FY19, the council, the city, we put aside some designated revenue sources for the Main Street Myers Pool project. So there was a small increase in the property tax rate, local options tax, and some set aside for the TIF funding to specifically pay for those two projects because we could not fit them into the current capital plan. So luckily, even like our projections in FY19 are still good in FY23, surprisingly. So those funds, which you'll see in here, do fully cover the debt for the Main Street and Pool project. So this budget doesn't ask for any additional funds for those two projects. So you'll see those sort of like as a separate revenue. So base is basically everything but Myers Pool and the Main Street revitalization project. So for the high-level overview of what's in here, typical stuff like our annual street resurfacing, our fleet replacements. We have some new debt starting, like the fire truck, the tower truck. We've got some new items that we'll discuss, such as some infrastructure planning studies that we're proposing, potentially some new snow and ice equipment, and initiating some traffic calming funding sources. One thing we've heard a few times from community members. The other thing that's in this plan currently that's for your review is potentially 2 bond votes. So one is reallocation of funds from the Hickok Street project that was completed. We came in under budget. We have roughly $550,000 in funding that we can push to another similar project. I know city manager talked about that kind of in the high level budget, so we'll get into those details. And then the Winooski Burlington Bridge, potentially bond vote this year for the cost share. And then there's some potential add-ons there if you felt, if you wanted to take those on. And I will, the challenge, and the challenge has always been this, is trying to just fit everything we need to fit into the capital fund with the current revenue that we have. So again, talking about the base capital budget, we have roughly $620,000 that's historically allocated for the capital plan. We've already got $381,055 in debt that we have to pay for. So that only leaves us about $239,000 to support, all our capital needs. So it's a pretty large ask. And then what we're showing tonight is that we probably need around $193,000 to do all the stuff that we want to do in this capital budget. And obviously that is up for discussion because, as we said, this budget can kind of move up and down.
John, the numbers you just gave, the 193,
Yep.
that includes if the Main Street bond passed and we're adding that debt service into the total?
The bridge
Yeah.
bond. So the bridge bond actually doesn't, that debt wouldn't come online until potentially FY26. So there's no debt right now
Okay.
for FY25.
So 193 for what's in here, there's and then another increase the following,
Correct.
yeah, okay.
Yes, yeah. And then just to caveat what's not included, because there are a lot of other needs that, we hear from other department heads that we do want to try to fit in a future capital budget. As you can see, there's, a lot of bullet points here on the park side, specifically some of the parks and open space master plan projects. Also want to call out, we have some pretty limited capital reserve funding. So a lot of times there's projects that, we have a planning study for, but we don't have any reserves set aside to go after like a grant match, for example. So it would be nice to have, start putting some money towards some of these future projects, like the 2 bridge replacements that we'll have to do at some point, Main Street, Weaver Street. just to help us when we're chasing some grant funding in the future. The other piece too is now with the TIF expiration, those capital assets are now kind of gonna be in this capital fund now. So like the Riverwalk, Rotary Park, those are now part of just the general fund capital plan. And they're, getting 20-ish years old, so they're also gonna need probably some maintenance, capital level maintenance in the next few years, I would say.
How come Weaver Street Bridge is not included on this, not included list?
Did not want to overwhelm you, I guess. No, it could be. This is a limited
It's not
list, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
Any questions on background info at this point?
If you would just go back to that last slide again.
Yeah.
I guess there are items on the not included list that we've talked about at other points in time and other funding opportunities, and I know that we need to get into it now, but the renovations needed for the police department, I think I've brought up a couple different opportunities to work with Vermont Gas and Green Mountain Power and our utility partners for reducing costs for, I think maybe on the previous slide, the DPW boiler furnace replacement, lighting for Landry, just thinking about different funding opportunities to help reduce out-of-pocket general fund expenses. So
Yeah.
we can just
For
have
the,
that in our
the
mind.
PD, we do have some money still sitting in reserve, and we have an approach that's involving the police department staff on determining what those are. There was some basic testing we thought would make sense to get done first. That's done now, so
Great.
that's why that's not listed, because I'm anticipating we can probably do some improvements without additional funding, but we still need to see what the plan is.
Okay, great. Thank you
Yeah,
for that.
and one point to add on that too is, a lot of times what we'll try to do is once we know we're actually, okay, we've got some funding in place to do a project, think of like Main Street, we'll start chasing grants because we know we've got funding to do it. It becomes a much more, I guess, it's a project that we can easily or more easily get grants for. And I didn't mention this in the beginning, but the capital plan money, it does roll over year after year. So, if there's a savings on like a facility project, because we get a grant, that funding just stays in that facilities capital grant reserve, and then we can use
So it doesn't
that.
get swept.
Correct.
Great.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Okay, this section's a little bit longer. It start getting into some of the details. I don't get too heavily into the numbers towards the end, but the third sort of group of slides is where I'll get into some of the numbers more. So last meeting I heard, a little bit about, and I hear from everyone, community-wide, neighbors, streets and sidewalks. That's probably number one issue I hear about in my position. So I thought it might be helpful just to give a kind of a high-level overview on how we think about street pavement management and sidewalk pavement, just so you know what options and things we're looking at when we're putting this kind of street pavement management together. So the bottom sort of picture here, diagram, is actually Hickok Street. That's from the Hickok Street project we did. So when we're thinking of a street or a roadway, we're actually looking at like this, 28-inch thick section of roadway. And a lot of times when we're doing these annual street paving projects, we're really just touching the first 1.5 inch layer of asphalt. That's typically what you see on the annual basis. But there's actually, that road base is very thick. And honestly, our main goal is to try to stay out of that very thick road base. We want to just be, doing resurfacing at the top section of the roadway. So that's what this, see if I can do this here. That's sort of what this graph up here shows. So our goal when we're doing these paving projects is we want to stay here. This is a sort of pavement degradation graph. So this is the condition, 100 being, this is brand new, freshly paved. Down here, this road's dead. It's got no more life in it. And then just time frame. So we're trying to stay pretty much up here when we're doing paving projects. And most times we're, unfortunately, we're probably more like in this area or even a little bit lower when we're doing resurfacing work. And the reason why is because once you start getting down here, you can kind of see some numbers on this graph. It gets, exponentially more expensive. On this graph, they're showing like 4 times. I've seen 10, 20 times more. Because then at this point, you're doing this whole road. You're not just doing this top section. And how you do that is you do these incremental resurfacings. So, every 10, 15 years, you're doing a resurfacing project, trying to keep that PCI up to, in a good condition. So that's kind of our goal when we're trying to do these like annual paving projects, because it's once you start getting into this level, it's just, then it becomes a major finance capital project, and that's not ideal. And then just to show you kind of, these are what treatments we have available to us. So pavement preservation is sort of the first one there. That's the least expensive. Crack sealing, you've probably seen us do that over the years. That gives basically it's like your driveway sealer if you have asphalt driveway at home. Gives it a little bit more useful life, but it's really just to kind of preserve that roadway and keep it alive a little bit longer. Pavement rehab, that's your typical, you see us milling on the street and then resurfacing the top layer. That gives us about another 10 or 20 years of useful life. That's typically what you see every year. That's what we're doing. And then on the far right is the reconstruction. That picture is from Hickok Street. That's again where we're taking up the whole roadway. It's a major, long-term debt financial project. So sometimes you have to do it. Sometimes it's utility driven. That was the case for Hickok Street. We probably could have, maybe mill and filled that road, but there was just too many utility issues in that street, and that was the driver for that particular street. So getting back to Winooski specific items, we maintain about 15.6 centerline miles of streets, local streets. The gateway streets like Main Street and East Allen, V-Trans comes back every 20 years and resurfaces those streets. So we don't include them when we're looking at what's our, network-wide pavement condition index. So right now we're forecasting that we have about we're at about a 68. So if you remember that degradation curve, that's kind of in the fair target range, but we'd like to be, our goal is to be around 72. So if we were, to get to that level, what would it cost? And it's about a $750,000 investment to, mill and fill enough streets that are candidates for that type of work to get the whole network up to a 72. Just for, ballpark example, just so you have a rough idea. But there are streets that we do have in the network right now that are below a pavement condition index of 25 that are probably candidates for reconstruction. But so that's, that would be a $3.2 million number. That is very, very ballpark. So we would have to look at each street and, review what utilities needed to be, not the utilities are in this number, but see if we could do a lesser treatment. So just to give you some really, really rough ballpark numbers on the amount of street work that's needed. So a recommendation is, if you wanted to have like a pavement program that was, getting the PCI back up to like a 72 value, and we're doing, you know, our best effort on increasing pavement conditions. I would say if we could get to a spot where we're doing 1 centerline mile of neighborhood streets a year, that would get us to where we're coming back every 15 years to that street, which is about the useful life of the streets that we have in our network. And we would also recommend, you know, biannually doing the pavement preservation work. So fog sealing, crack sealing, ideally we're doing that once you resurface, come back in 5 years and crack seal or fog seal, just to, you know, try to keep the life in that pavement. That is an ideal scenario. So that would be about $325 right now based on current asphalt prices, just to give you an idea of, you know, what that would take to have like a very sustainable paving program.
John, what are we currently spending a year?
So it varies, but we're usually in the $200,000 range. Last year was actually pretty close. So we had a budget of, I think it was 280, 290, but we did have some concrete work, curbing concrete work that we had to address. But the FY24 was like 0.75 miles. So it's, and I will say, like, Winooski is getting much better. I think previously the budgets were like, they were varied. So it'd be like $100,000 one year and like 80,000. Like, it has gotten, you know, much more consistent over the last few years and much higher. So, I mean, kudos to you all, because it has improved quite a bit even the last few years. So, double check. Yeah, so here's I think this is the last slide on streets, but this is the overall GIS map of our pavement condition. The colors reference the PCI numbers. Green is good, darker is bad, red is really bad. So this outlines, you know, our 5-year sort of outlook on where we want to be resurfacing over the next few years. For FY25, we're proposing to tackle these streets up in the north. My pointer thing works again here. Oops. There we go. So this is what we're proposing for FY25 for resurfacing. These are pretty neighborhood local streets. So even though this one's kind of in the red, meaning it has a low PCI, we've reviewed it and it appears that a mill and fill is going to be adequate given the amount of traffic that street gets. A reconstruction project here wouldn't be advisable, just because it really doesn't get too much traffic, so it's not going to see that vehicle load. So this, I believe, it's about 0.6 miles, which is, you know, that's a pretty decent year of paving. But we're also proposing, which you'll see in later slide 2, is these streets were kind of left off. We had them proposed for FY23. The issue was, we realized afterwards that to do it correctly, we really need to replace the concrete, all of the concrete curbing, and that would also allow us to replace the concrete sidewalk. You'll see a picture in a later slide where you can kind of see there's zero curbing revealed there. So what we're proposing to do is utilize the bond funding from the Hickok Street project that is street sidewalks related to replace this concrete curbing and the concrete sidewalks in this area. And actually, and we'll be getting to sidewalks next, these are probably some of the worst sidewalks in the city. So, and then what we'd end up doing is coming back in FY26 to do the actual resurfacing. So originally we were going to try to do the east side this year, but given that we're looking to do the concrete work over here, we moved over to this section up on the west side. So, and then future years, what currently we're targeting is FY26, we'd be doing this. FY27, we'd be doing West Street here and a couple of these streets. Hickok Street was recently reconstructed. And then jumping back over to some of these streets over here, there's probably 2 years of work in here, so we've got to sort that out a little bit. So this year, the estimated cost is around $212,000 based on our cost estimating. And going back to that previous slide, if you all wanted to increase the paving budget to say that one centerline mile, that's about $130,000. There's a couple options there. We could add more paving. We could also look at trying to find some grant match for some of the Class 2 streets. So Class 2 streets are, we call them more of like a connector street. So think of East Spring, North Street to, I'm sorry, I believe East Spring, LaFountain, Dion, and then Winooski and Abenaki Way is also a connector street, but particularly East Spring Street is getting to be in pretty poor condition. So that would be on our target list for resurfacing. V-Trans has a competitive Class 2 grant that they come out with. We usually try to save up a couple of years of not applying so that we could hopefully get a bigger sum for that grant, but that would likely be where we would utilize that funding, is to support some of those Class 2 streets.
So, John, I'm curious why it looks like there's, trying to read, so like the northern section of Dion, the eastern section of Bellevue, northern section of Franklin, like that looks like it has more purple and red than some of the other sections, and I don't know if the recent walk audit that was done identified that as a priority for, since it's up near the school, if that, some of the scoping that was done this past fall from CCRPC and other partners identified that as a higher priority.
Yeah, so we are thinking for those areas, one, the walk bike plan identified like a curb cut on Upper Dion to install where it kind of enters the campus there. So that way, I think that's something we can do regardless of a paving program, but that is one thing. George Street, Upper Franklin are both high priority candidates, especially with the school project done. George Street is also a candidate for traffic calming evaluation. So ideally, we'd be doing that traffic calming review and then resurfacing after that if the traffic calming study showed, like, if it met the warrants for traffic calming and we could do something there. Speed humps, for example, I'm thinking of particularly. So yeah, that is something that's sort of also baked in when we're looking at these paving programs. We do look at these very corridor specific. So what you're not seeing on here is we'll overlay water main breaks, data from walk bike plan if they've identified some improvements there. We like to look at, what is the general sidewalk condition and the curbing reveal. So there is a little bit more baked into this, but yeah, we'll look at that walk bike plan.
Yeah, because it just seems inconsistent to prioritize certain projects based off of the road centerline conditions, the PCI, PC1? PCI, thank you.
Yeah.
Small thought. The PCI conditions, when that, like this, if we just look at just this particular slide, it would seem inconsistent to prioritize areas without having knowledge of what those other overlays are, the
Mhm.
walk bike plan, other infrastructure, anticipated water main replacement needs, stormwater issues.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's provided in a later slide.
It isn't, because it is hard to display. You
Yeah.
know, we're showing you the sort of like the end of the equation of like
Okay.
when we're bringing in like those different layers to see. And we have to, so the other piece of this is in the summertime, our DPW crew will go out ahead of a paving project and adjust all of the utility structures. So they do an investigation of the utility structures and see if it's feasible. So it's, you know, this is not just me saying like, hey, these are the streets we're doing. It's reviewing it with our public works crew to see what's feasible for structure replacement and, you know, talking with our our utility manager to see, all right, historically, how many breaks have we had on here? If we pave this, are we gonna have another water break? And, you know, we're tearing up new asphalt. So we can we could probably show you a few different GIS maps to kind of show you how we get to that result, if that
Mhm.
helps.
And then you mentioned, so in the previous slides, you mentioned some potential funding set aside for traffic calming studies. Was the George Street, did you intend for George Street to be one of those two traffic calming studies?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the reason is, you know, we're thinking about the Main Street project. That's gonna kind of skew traffic patterns. George Street is far enough away, it wouldn't skew any traffic patterns there. There's also, I believe, one on, I think West Street is also identified. Like West Street, that is not gonna skew a traffic calming evaluation.
Okay, so, and then just to connect the dots.
Yep.
The reason why we would prioritize those over, say, other streets that we've heard complaints about, Weaver, LeClaire, is because we know we are imminently going to increase volume because of Main Street on those connector
Correct.
streets.
Yep.
Cool, all right, just making sure we're closing the loop there, thanks.
Any other questions on pavement before we go to sidewalks? Okay. Sidewalks. So sidewalks don't have that sort of degradation curve that pavement does. So that's why, you know, we've heard in commission meetings things like, "Oh, just move money to sidewalks. Don't do paving this year." And so our pushback is like, you know, it's better to do the resurfacing work every year, keep up on it, because the problem is like once the pavement gets into that lower degradation curve, then you don't have money to do anything because you're reconstructing all streets. So sidewalks, predominantly you're just replacing. There isn't really a maintenance. You don't have the tools of like different maintenance activities for sidewalk. Usually you're replacing it associated with a paving project for the most part. So that's why I would not recommend taking money from street pavement and moving it to sidewalks. So just to give you some quick numbers, we have about 19.1 miles of sidewalk that we maintain. We've got, you know, roughly 10,000 linear feet of sidewalk in our GIS that is in poor condition. If we were to replace all that in one shot, that's about a $1.1 million project. We also have in our transportation master plan about 3,640 linear feet of proposed sidewalk expansion. So sidewalks where we don't currently have any sidewalks on the streets. So think of like North Street or Dion Street, some of those locations. Those are a little bit harder to estimate because that will require typically some additional work. So you might need a retaining wall or you might need to relocate utilities. So it's very case by case. So it's hard to put a value on that. What we would recommend for, just annual sidewalk work is at a minimum, update the 88 ramps, the curb ramps when we're doing the resurfacing for streets. That is currently in this budget for the FY25 paving. So for the FY25 paving, there are 4 ADA ramps that are non-compliant, so we would just recommend replacing those, get them into compliance. And then as we're going through the annual paving program, just replacing sidewalks that are in poor condition. For FY25, those streets, that development, that area of the city is relatively newish, I guess you could say, as far as the city goes. So RGIS will have to do a closer look, but those sidewalks are in pretty good condition based on our GIS inventory.
John, so 325,000 would be ideal for the paving program. Do you have an annual estimate that would include the sidewalk work alongside paving?
Yeah, it'll vary. I mean, so what we're recommending is look at it with your paving program. And, you know, for example, the FY23 paving that we wanted to do, that's, you know, $300,000 worth of sidewalk work that has to happen. This year is zero, you know. So it is, we would have to look at it case by case.
Okay.
Paving.
We had that discussion in advance, and part of the issue is that you don't wanna lock up that money if you can spend it on a street, because of everything that John said about the sidewalk. So
Yeah.
it does make more sense to flex that part of it. And it's not because we don't wanna prioritize sidewalks, it's because it is very, and you might as well use that money for something else and lock it up in there.
Can I ask a follow-up? So the ADA ramps are the 4 that you're talking about, all of them that need to be?
No. So, the picture I have up here, we have CCRPC performed an evaluation citywide on all our ADA ramps. If I remember, I think we have like 380 total citywide. I think like 75% of them were non-compliant. So this is a picture of one on, is that Bernard and Floor?
Gail?
Yeah. Oops, sorry. Oh, sorry, all. That is an actual AD ramp that we have that would be replaced as part of that Hickok Street funding that's shifting over. So this is what I was saying, like that concrete curb is gone. The sidewalk is kind of in shambles. There is no ADA ramp there. What we're proposing is that curbing, imagine it be, it's 6 inches higher. The road surface elevation isn't changing, but the curb height is. And so we got to kind of bring everything up with it, all the sidewalk work. So that would look, if as part of this FY25 project, that would change to one of the newer ADA ramps with detectable warning and be compliant.
Okay. Yeah, and it might have been I was getting, in my mind, confused too about that tactile warning, because I feel like I definitely see those some places where there's not necessarily a crosswalk, and then not in places where there is a crosswalk, and just kind of the concern, especially with the former, there's no crosswalk, but we're telling someone that there's a crosswalk there, of just that concern. And I don't know if those are cheaper to, no, probably not, but.
Yeah, so all ADA curb ramps have to have detectable warning. That is the regulation now. So we do a steel, like, it's like a mat with the bumps on them. So any ADA ramps that we replace now have to have that detectable warning in it.
Okay. And I guess, maybe my question is, did the ADA ramp or the ADA review also include those technical warnings, or is that something that we don't have data on?
On the, sorry, can you say
The
that?
detectable warning?
Yeah. So that is one of the criteria. So
Okay.
we met with RPC, and so what we did is we used the ADA criteria for what makes an adequate ADA ramp. So there's a few pieces. One is detectable warning, and it has to be in a certain location and like a certain distance from the end of the curb. slopes are a big one, and just the width, and it has to have a 5-foot pathway, and it's pretty involved. Like, I've seen a project where they actually did a 3D survey of an ADA ramp that they thought might not be in compliant. If you looked at it, you'd be like, oh, that's a typical one. So they had to go out there with a slope measurement tool and make sure it's, within range. So there is a pretty strict design around ADA curb ramps.
Yeah, I guess my question is around so my understanding with the tactical is they are primarily for blind folks to know where there's a crosswalk. So I guess I have some additional concerns of how are we tracking that? Because that doesn't necessarily, how much does that cost? Again, there are places that don't have it that should, and places that do have it that maybe shouldn't. I'm specifically thinking about on Main Street, up by the school. There is one there.
Yeah,
so
that shouldn't be now.
So
Yeah,
if someone who wouldn't be able to otherwise see would assume there's a crosswalk there. So just those concerns. So either maybe there should be a crosswalk there. That's a different conversation. But thinking about those as well.
Yeah, that I know the ramp you're talking about. That is the only one that I know of that's in a place that we've been told there shouldn't be a crossing there. However, with the Main Street project, there will be a median protected RFB crossing that will be compliant. So, yeah, to answer your question, so yes, what the proposal is for when we do street resurfacing is at least look at the ADA ramps and get them up to code so they're ADA compliant and they have the correct slope, the correct detectable warning. And so at least annually we're doing some work on those. Because ultimately we have to, we as part of our ADA transition plan, we have to update all of our ADA ramps to meet those requirements. So that's what I'm proposing now, is just put it in with the annual resurfacing. Actually, in New York State requires that, so Vermont doesn't require it, but that's what we've typically done when I worked in New York, is when we're doing resurfacing, we have to update those curb ramps at least.
Okay.
What's RFB stand for?
Rapid flash beacons, when you push the button and the lights go. And,
Okay. Thank you for that context.
The other thing, though, too, sidewalks. They have a much higher useful life than a roadway. Obviously, I don't see the same loading as a roadway, but that is one thing to consider. 40 years. I've seen 50, 60 years too used for reference. So usually it's tree uplifts, things like that. The slabs will uplift, but they have a much higher useful life than a roadway. And I will say, so the city is we'll be doing quite a bit of sidewalk replacement work in the next 2 years potentially. So if the proposed bond bill goes through to reallocate funds, that's about 2,740 linear feet of sidewalk replacement. Main Street, which is a massive sidewalk project too, that's 5,280 feet. So about 1.5 miles of sidewalk work currently programmed. So pretty good chunk at least in the next few years. That's it for here's the GIS map for sidewalk. So as mentioned, this is the location we're proposing to do that sidewalk curbing work for FY25. I also just wanted to call this out, not necessarily an FY25 thing, but there's one gap of sidewalk here on West Canal that actually a neighbor who has visual impairment sent us an email and said, hey, is there any way you can get a sidewalk in here? And turned out that the property owner of that compound, they were repaving their the front entrance, and we worked with them, and we're piggybacking on their contractor to fill in like a section of sidewalk gap though. So, and it'd have detectable warning on each end. We sent the specs over to the neighbor who lives on that street, and he was happy. He's like, yes, this will work for me. So kind of a success story of like working with some of our neighbors to like find a need, working with the property owner, piggybacking on some contracting work that they're already doing. So they're looking to do that work this spring. And then of course, Main Street, which again, pretty large sidewalk project as well. The other piece that we're trying to find some grant money for is this section here on East Spring. So Hood's Crossing to Russell Street currently has no sidewalk. This is a section of pretty wide street that we think we can kind of squeeze some sidewalk in. So we are looking at trying to apply for a V-Trans TAP grant, potentially, or what we're pursuing most likely is pursuing a TAP grant for this work, which is up to I think 50%. And then if we do get that, then we would push it over to do this sidewalk expansion. So that's one thing we're reviewing right now. You kind of see that in the photos.
TAP is Transportation Alternatives Program?
Yep. And we've been successful with that grant in the past.
Yeah, can confirm that. It's not fun to walk there.
Yeah.
You know, the one question that I brought up and mentioned, answered, John, but I thought might be still useful to bring up, is thinking about, especially around sidewalks, how we weigh equity. And it sounds like you have thought about some of with the bike ped plan, how they kind of weighted things. So yeah, I just want to kind of put that out there. Yeah, how can we kind of use some stuff that we're seeing to make sure that we are prioritizing where these are most needed?
Yeah, and that's where we rely on those plans, like the walk bike plan or transportation master plan.
And why would we be holding off on the West Allen section? Does that need water main replacement?
Excuse me, the West Allen's?
It's red, the lower, you're talking about the missing piece, but just above it shows that it's poor condition.
Oh, you're talking about.
I can see from the streets, it looks like the PCI is in good condition.
Talking about this
Yes.
section here.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that is the funding. I mean, so that is, that would be a priority replacement given the condition, but it's, I suspect that's probably around over a couple thousand feet of replacement work. Are you saying in lieu of the Hickok Street, or the
Not
Bernard Gale?
Not Hickok, but it's red, right?
Yeah, yep.
So, looking at the priorities of the condition, it's just, I think maybe the legend
Mm-hmm.
is a little confusing, because you see like the condition, blue, green, red, and then you see the priority, sections don't, and so this is where that overlapping
gotcha,
with maybe
gotcha.
like, is there a water main project?
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
Are there other considerations that
Yep.
just aren't, the whole full story isn't captured on this map?
Right. So priority sections are no sidewalks. So there's currently no sidewalks in those areas. Yeah.
All right, that's helpful, thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, I do want to say this is enlightening, to a comment I made at the last meeting. Like, I can see that there is a lot of pavement maintenance and sidewalk built into this budget. It's just primarily through like special funded projects and not like the annual. So I feel like there's a discussion for next year.
Any questions on sidewalk before I go to the bond stuff? Okay. So I know you are all familiar with this project. So just to recap, the Burlington Winooski Bridge, I always want to call it the Winooski Burlington Bridge, but the Burlington Winooski Bridge is currently in concept design. Kind of see the rough schedule that's outlined. Proposed construction 2027, but there is work going on design-wise right now. So the Excel table I have in there, that is from VTrans, so that is their spending profile for the next few years that they've provided. Our match currently is at 5%, so that's what it would look like for the city as far as payments to VTrans over the next few fiscal years. So that's why we are proposing a bond vote this year is, so at least we can cover that 5%. And we're not pulling it from capital plan, or, another revenue source. So that is what we're looking at right now. Not sure if there's too much more to say on this project. There's gonna be a lot of outreach, obviously, in the next couple months.
So that's how much money we would need, over 3 million contribution towards our 5%. How much would it cost for us to borrow that 3 million?
So that, I can show you in the debt slides. I mean, typically, we are making payments to VTrans. I think typically, Angela, what is it, if you're still there, 3%-ish at this point?
It's gonna be higher than 3. Borrowing costs have gone up. The last borrowing I had was at 3.79 from the bond bank.
3.79% interest.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm reading this right. I thought our match is 3 million. We're paying no interest, 3,400 in interest at the end?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so that is our match from VTrans, but that doesn't include the interest payment we would pay for financing.
Which is, that's the question that I'm asking. is
Good point.
Total cost.
Yep.
So is there some consideration to phase the amount that we're asking for in a bond so that
Yes.
we're not?
So the recommendation would be to do a bond for just the pre-development work only
Okay.
to start, and then until they have a really solid number on what the construction cost would be, take out that second bond.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So for us, I guess visualizing, would that be like this FY 24, 25, 26? Of how much around the bond would be?
Yeah,
For
the
the first
first
person?
bond would be for that FY 24 to FY 26 amount, I
Okay.
would say. It's similar, if you remember, to the Main Street project. So Main Street, we did a bond for the engineering services. We have the bond vote for the full
The whole
number.
cost.
That just says, hey, like, we want to expend up to this amount, that's our ceiling. But then, as we move through the project, we'll do the smaller, like, just for the engineering services, just for this, construction inspection services, typically through the bond bank, and then a construction bond. And all of those combined have to be below the voter-approved bond vote value. Angela, I believe that includes interest too, right?
Interest does not need to be below the bond voted amount. Interest is always over and above the bond voted amount. Just the face value of the debt, the principal that we borrow.
Also, if you wanted, these are adults that you could potentially tack on to a bond vote. So these are mainly things that we've heard from community members as issues, and there is an opportunity to receive some match from VTrans because it is supporting the bridge project. So for example, the Hood Crossing signalization, which is shown on the right, that comes from our East Allen Gateway Enhancement Study. So that was the selected alternative to clean up that intersection that's, it has a railroad through, it's got odd geometry. This East Allen's gonna be a primary detour route for the bridge project. So in my discussions with VTrans, we said, hey, look, you're gonna have to do something at this intersection to make it viable for more traffic volume. And they would likely have to do some sort of temporary signalization to make this intersection work for the additional traffic volume. So they're amenable to providing a cost match for whatever that temporary cost would be to signalization for this project. We've also reached out to CCRPC to review if there's any opportunities for federal dollars to support doing this project. So you probably saw in the slides for the bridge, Burlington's redoing their intersection on the other side of the bridge, 100% federally funded. So, obviously we're asking the question, how do we get our intersection 100% federally funded? So they're reviewing that.
What are these numbers? Is one of these what VTrans would pay and one what we would then need to pay?
No, so this is the total. This is just floating tonight for you to think about. So in the East Allen scoping study, the estimate to do that work is about 1.1 million. 2023, it's probably 1.75. So that doesn't include anything. That doesn't include any potential match. It doesn't include.
How much do you think VTrans would contribute?
I do not know. We have a call with them tomorrow, so
Okay.
We'll see. So again, just floating this tonight to think about. And then as we move through more budget presentations, we'll be getting more info on, what those match numbers might be if you did want to consider it.
Okay.
And I think when we reviewed the walk, bike, ped draft last meeting, this section, this area was flagged as high risk.
Yeah. The other item that's a little more straightforward is, while they're doing the bridge, it makes a lot of sense to probably do, some resurfacing on these streets. Given that these streets are about 20 years old at that point, so, this is probably a more reasonable number. I think we estimate around 120,000 to just mill and fill these streets. So that might be something potentially could include in the bond vote.
How will
Again.
that overlay with the hotel project timeline?
Hotel would be done. And I think the scope will change a bit because the hotel, in effect, will be doing repaving most of Abenaki Way.
Okay.
That little section 2 south of Abenaki on the very far right, that's private. That's
Yep.
not actually part of the scope. But something we're thinking about, and we may propose if you want to do a bond vote this year for the bridge.
What was your estimate on that one?
It was around 120. I'll go back and look. I thought I included it in here, but this got missed. But yeah, right around there.
Okay.
Other items, other projects. So the ones in red, I've got a couple slides. I've got 2 slides on because they're kind of new. Fleet and facilities are just replacements of stuff that we already have. They're fairly rote. The capital asset planning items. So the Weaver Street Bridge and the Main Street Bridge, the 2 bridges that cross over the railroad, they are around 100 years old as well. So we have one structural analysis for each bridge. They are probably coming due for some, capital maintenance. So we're proposing to do an updated structural evaluation on both those bridges, just so we have a better idea of how much we should be setting aside for some work on those. Riverwalk capital needs. So in the picture, you're all familiar with Riverwalk. That was a TIF project. That is the one capital asset in the downtown we want to kind of get some better data on, like, what's appropriate to be replacing some of those concrete structures and some the decking, and like there's some structures along the bridge. So what we're proposing is to do a capital needs assessment, which we have something similar for like the parking garage that's really helpful. It really helps us plan out our capital plan. So it'd give us some structural engineer feedback on like how much we should be funding and what timing we should be funding some of this stuff. So that is also in the plan. And then the police department interior renovation study work. So we do have some funding that was set aside to do some renovation work on the first floor as part of the regional planning study. So we're proposing to just use those funds to look at what renovation work we should be thinking about in the future.
So that's not an ad then?
No.
Okay.
Using existing funds, yep. Yeah, so in here, and like I said, I'll get to the 2 red items. So the fleet, that is all ads. The facilities is say ad, it's an expense for FY25. All those are expenses. The bridge evaluations are expenses. Or sorry, those are not expenses. Those are funds we have. Riverwalk is an expense. So getting those 2 other items. So we do have in our capital budget some undesignated capital reserves. It's about, I think, around 30 grand. Most of our capital reserve funds is dedicated to specific categories or projects. So what I'm proposing is to kind of scoop up that money, given all the requests we've heard from the public, kind of seeding a traffic calming line item to help fund potentially those low cost intermediate solutions, or just help seed the future long-term construction items. So it's not an expense for FY25. And for future, what we're proposing is, and you'll see this in other slides, is the revenue designated for Main Street and Myers Pool. That forecast is showing that we are going to have some funds available that are going to push back, that are going to come back to this base capital plan. And what I'm proposing is use those funds to help fund this traffic calming initiative.
So the evaluations are in the budget proposal, and then these undesignated reserves would be seed money for whatever initial implementation?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And then I did want to call this out. So this is a new asset. So I always want to call out anything that's new, because now we got to maintain it and, put in new ones. So our crew has been, we've been looking at potentially implementing what's called a brine system for snow and ice control. So brine is just water and salt. It's typically a 22% salt solution. So where I came from, when I worked in New York, we implemented this. This is pretty standard in New York. Most municipalities were using this. The benefit of using this system is it does reduce the amount of salt that you have to purchase annually. And our current DPW crew we've sent them to a few trainings now, and they're kind of leading this at this point, where they're like, we want to do this. We think it's probably going to save some money and provide better results. So we are proposing it for this year. The benefit of the system is, it is an expense, but it has potentially like a 4-year plus or minus payback on it. So Hyde Park is, that's where our DPW crew has gone over and done some training with them. New York, South Burlington also has some pre-wet systems. They're seeing like a 47 to 35% savings on purchase of salt. So currently we use about 900 tons of road salt, just about 80 grand a year. So this system, we would outfit 2 trucks with, it's called a pre-wet system. So it sprays the brine solution on the salt. It slows down the amount of salt you're putting on the road. And effectively what it's doing is you're putting less pounds of salt on the road, because instead of it bouncing everywhere or going into catch basins or, just getting swept away, it's already activated, it's hitting the road, and you don't have to use as much. So it's a pretty simple solution. So that's the actual tank system that we would potentially purchase. So it's a tank, it's motor, it's some sensors, it's pretty robust. I would say something like that would last 10 to 15 years. And then that truck is set up with a little bit of a different system, but it's a tank with a sprayer. It's a pretty simple system. So that is currently in the budget right now.
Some questions on this?
Yep.
So there are no pros and cons listed on this slide. I think one of the factors for having it successful is temperature. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's with, salt in general. Below, 20 degrees or so, like, salt doesn't work anyways. You can add magnesium or something like that to get it to work in those colder weather situations, but it is effectively, it's already pre-activated salt that we currently have.
So would the brine, the pre-wet option allow us to apply, whereas like salt wouldn't be effective below 20 degrees, does the brine allow effectiveness down to like -5 degrees? Like what's the temperature?
It is the same as just regular salt, so it doesn't like refreeze or freeze out of the system. So the main reason we would use a brine maker is the key point is you have to get it to like a 22-23% solution. More or less, that's when you get into some issues with like refreezing.
Okay.
So there are some municipalities I think that have put in giant tank and like kind of made their own, and they didn't get good results.
And would the truck need to be able to be parked inside the DPW garage or somewhere else that's warm enough?
So the truck would not, there's no concern about freezing, so it doesn't fall out of solution.
Okay.
The brine maker would need to go inside. Our crew has already identified a location inside that they can place this item. They're gonna have Cargill even come out with the main vendors and just check and make sure that does work. So there's some small electrical costs that we've included because they, there's a little bit of fit up to it, but it's pretty nominal.
So is that going to take up a significant amount of space that would need solutions for storage for other stuff?
No, it's where we had an old washer that we no longer use, so it's not gonna take up room for like equipment.
And then other alternatives that I've seen used elsewhere is molasses. And what's the difference between the benefits of this over that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the molasses use, so I know molasses. I have heard that becomes an issue with vehicles because it's molasses with salt, so there's more likelihood that that's going to stick to the underside of a vehicle, and then you get, rusting complaints, where, you're not going to have that sticking issue so much with just a brine solution. But yeah, I'd have to look into that one a little bit more. Not familiar with molasses.
Okay.
I've heard animals do like it though, but I don't think we have that issue in our.
Yeah, so we don't really have a lot of information on that.
No.
Okay. Thanks.
Before I get into numbers, any questions, any breaks, any just power through?
Let me ask first if there are any questions from members of the public. You can use the chat or raise hand feature. Judy, please come back up.
So for the brine applications, does the brine stay on the streets for as long a period as regular salt? Does it have to be applied more frequently or less frequently in general?
No, so it will, it is effectively the same thing we're putting down now. So the only difference would be we're using less salt. The spinner will rotate slower, we're putting less pounds down. So you may have seen, there's also another tool that you use with liquid snow and ice removal. It's called anti-icing. So that's where you have the tank and there's a spray bar on the bottom and then it just sprays the entire street. That's not what we're proposing for this. That gets into issues of people complaining about rust and rusting the undercarriage of their car. That leaves a residual. So the whole point of anti-icing is you spray the roads pre-storm and you have a road that's really white. And so when it snows, it almost acts like Teflon so that when they plow, it comes up a lot easier.
Okay, so it's something completely different than this other stuff. Well, not completely, but.
Different application of it, yeah.
And I know my street, you come down there typically with a small truck.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there are quite a few other streets of Winooski the same way.
Yep.
So will this be used with just the larger trucks or small trucks too?
So this proposal, we would use it just for the large snowplow trucks. But we also sometimes don't we won't put the plow down, and then we'll go out with the salt truck and just salt. So in that case, I suspect we'd be going on rolling court and just running the salt truck.
Okay. And I have one more question about sidewalk. Particularly the sidewalk, I think it'd be great to put sidewalk on that section of East Allen, that one short section.
Mm-hmm.
And the street there's in terrible condition too. But on East Allen Street itself, where there's brick sidewalk, especially down closer to downtown, and I had occasion to walk on that street specifically this spring. I don't usually go down that way when I'm walking, but I'm telling you, there's treachery there because there are sections where bricks are just completely missing and heaved up because there are street trees. And I'm like, this is a serious accident waiting to happen. And it just so happened that a few days after I was walking there, I was driving along East Allen, and I saw a person with visual impairment, obviously, because the person was walking with a white cane on that section of sidewalk. And I thought, holy cow, this is really bad. I think that needs to be fixed. And I don't know if that's in the TIF district. I have no idea what it is. But, I really think that's a bad situation.
Yeah, there's probably so I've gone out and I've spray painted all those locations, measured them out. I'm currently trying to put together a bid to, and it's all tree root uplifts. So put together a bid for someone to come in, take out the pavers, grind the roots. In some locations, we're gonna have to pull out the tree completely and then reset those pavers. So that is probably an operational cost, because we're just replacing, but I'm putting together a bid for that
Okay.
right now.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
Okay. I've got 7:40. Let's take a 5-minute recess, reconvening at 7:45 to dive into the numbers. Into it. Give us
Okay.
the numbers.
A few more slides. So high level, talked a little bit about this at the beginning. Existing base general fund debt is $381,055. That's again minus Main Street and the pool. With all the things that I presented earlier, that's about we're showing about an additional $432,402 for FY25. Most of that is the paving and sidewalks and some of that planning and equipment purchases, which I'll show. So that comes to $813,000 for the $457 for the base CIP costs. And the current revenue that we've always sort of forecasted, which I'll show details of, is $620,000. So that's roughly $193,000 additional potentially needed to the CIP. So here's just kind of that in table form. So in the green, that's the typical revenue sources for the general fund capital plan. In the red is showing future years out what additional funding would be needed. So FY26, that is when potentially the bridge work comes in. So that's where that bump's coming from. We also have some fleet replacement that we're looking at. Some more expensive like sidewalk plow replacements, plow truck replacements that year. And then down below, you kind of see more of the overview details of costs. So again, then it breaks down into capital debt versus capital expenses. So debt is, what we're proposing to finance for FY25. The $21,700 is that small dump truck. Typically those more expensive fleet vehicles we finance because they take up too much room in the capital plan. And then the 410 is again mainly sidewalks, pavement, and some of the equipment purchases.
Could you go back for a second?
Yeah.
FY26 to 20, I mean, those are significant increases.
Huge. Yeah.
That would be borne by tax increase?
Yes. So that again is the bridge, but I'm also including in here those like adult items, just so you can get to see like what that does, and that may change your minds on adding those items.
Mm-hmm. Would it be possible to get estimated what it would cost tax increase to cover that gap?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
We can add that to the budget options tool.
And I'll go in detail on these lines. I also wanted to show you, this is the Main Street Myers Pool kind of roll-up fund. So FY25, those are the revenues that we've sort of already dedicated, about $1 million in revenue for those two projects. FY25 for Myers Pool is just the ongoing debt for that project. Main Street, we're still sort of in, paying design phase work. You see the bump in FY27 because we don't close on the loan until the project is completely done, and even typically a year out, that's when we start paying on the debt. So that's why it's so far out there. Even though, we're starting construction, this summer. So as you can kind of see here, there's a little bit of funding left at net at the end of the day in FY27 that we would send that over to the base capital plan. But again, good news is FY19 projections are still good, even with all the turmoil that has happened since then. So we're, a lot of that is due to grants, and we were able to allocate, or we were able to maintain that USDA funding with a low interest rate. So that was extremely helpful.
We don't have an answer on local options tax. If we've hit the wall on the amount.
I haven't gotten a response yet.
Okay.
This is just a summary of the debt service, and I'll go into a little more detail on the existing debt and the proposed debt. So most of it you can see is fleet and transportation. Transportation is mostly the reconstruction projects, which you'll see, and then that fleet is that truck. So
Oh, another question.
Yeah.
The fire truck debt service must be in here.
yes.
Elaine, any forward motion on consideration of an impact fee for that cost?
We have not started that analysis yet.
When does that debt come on? Is it FY24 or 25?
25.
It'll be FY25. We will be applying for award in July. The truck is scheduled to be delivered in late summer.
Chart. It's the second one from the bottom under fleet. So FY25, we're showing an interest-only payment, which is pretty typical for like a bond bank loan. And then FY26 would be the full principal and interest payment, $88,000. We are currently showing $500,000 in fund balance use to buy that debt down. So I can't remember when that resolution was brought to you all, but we looked back at that, and you were given two options, like a buy down option and like a, pay the full freight, 1.3 million. I don't believe one was selected over the other, so I'm showing that buy down option currently. So this is all the existing debt we have currently, just broken out by category. As you can see, most of it's a lot of fleet and transportation are the two reconstruction projects we're paying debt on. I also have the maturity date of when some of that debt comes off the books. There's not a lot coming off in the next couple of years, unfortunately. So, you can see West Canal, Hickok Street. Hickok Street's fairly new debt, so that's 2040. There's some smaller ones coming off, like our plow trucks. We typically pay them off through a 4 or 5 year vehicle lease. So those come on and come off quickly. Proposed debt. So fleet replacement, and this is a forecast. So typically what we do is, with the fleet, I talk to our garage mechanic. I'm like, how's this piece of machine holding up? What do you think? A lot of times we are a little bit more conservative here, and we end up taking stuff off that we're like, this thing's got a couple more years in it. We're not having issues. Like, we don't need to replace it right now. So I will say, like, FY26 shown on here is probably a little conservative. Sidewalk plow, we may be able to keep. The backhoe and loader that's shown, we might be able to keep that for another year or so. But just to show you, like, a full impact, that's what we'd be looking at if we replaced those pieces of equipment on our kind of target schedule. Like, I think our backhoe and loader is like a 10-year replacement schedule for those pieces. And then I'm showing the Winooski bridge replacement on here, the $3 million. That FY27 is that would be with interest if we financed it. So that's the cost, principal and interest. And then if you did want to include those adult projects, that's the total cost. The numbers in red, they've changed a little bit since the first budget book. That's why I highlighted them in red, just because we've gotten a little more detailed with the numbers. So the second one, the Winooski Bridge associated projects, that's Hood Crossing and the paving work for reference.
So the bridge replacement line here, that includes the bond amount, and you said principal and interest.
Yeah, and you know, as you're saying that, so that is for the 3 million. This probably needs to be revised to show a bond for just the design work only, and then a future bond for construction. So
Okay.
that number will go down.
Okay.
We'll do a design only. Doesn't impact FY25, but you want to see obviously you want to see the whole picture here.
Is it on a slide? Maybe it's, if it's on one of the slides coming up, just let me know. I thought this past year council approved some of the, building access. Is that something?
There is building access, but I
thought we approved that already.
don't think we did, but I couldn't say for sure.
I thought it was like a special request outside of.
Are you thinking of Knox boxes?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's, we're talking about like the security panels here. That is for, fob access for emergency services is a different system.
Okay, all right. Yes, that's what I had.
So you did do
Okay.
that, but it's separate from this
Okay.
regular access.
Thanks for clarifying.
And then expenses are just the one-time. These are the one-time annual costs. So something that typically we can fit in the capital budget. We don't have to finance, don't have to pay interest on. This is just a roll-up of that. So as you can see, for FY25, most of that is transportation related, i.e. paving. The large numbers, that's the curbing and sidewalk work that we're reallocating funds to, existing funds that we already have. So that's why it's such a large number in there. I'll go through the details. So street resurfacing, you saw the, the mill and fill, 212,000 is what we're estimating for that work. Sidewalks and streetscape, so that's utilizing those funds we already have. From Hickok Street, pushing it over to the FY23 paving candidates, doing all the sidewalks, the curbing, the ADA ramps. And this also includes the ADA ramps for the FY25 paving. So those 4 ADA ramps is included in there. I'm not including anything for the Burlington-Winooski Bridge. If we do the bond vote, if we don't, then we'll have to, pay that match somehow once we sign that finance and maintenance agreement. So we can pay it out of fund balance, and if the bond passed, we can basically pay ourselves back. The bond is written that way, so that is an option too. So that's something I'll talk with Angela about more, but if we're doing the bond vote, I don't see a need to have any funding in there. And then I have basically a breakdown each category of stuff. So Public Works, the 30,200, that is the zero-turn mower mostly. And then the outfitting the 2 plow trucks with the brine making systems. And then
and I have a question on the previous slide. Sorry.
Yep.
The Hoods crossing, East Allen signal. I noticed that you don't have anything on slide 30 for traffic signals.
So that is under this one in that would be
Okay, it's
debt.
on
Yep, it's
slide.
in there. Yep, the very last
Okay,
row there.
I got it.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's 1.75 plus the paving work,
Okay.
roughly. So yeah, going back to this. The other thing I mentioned, so the traffic calming, this is where we're proposing to use existing reserves, 20,481 to just start seeding that fund potentially. And then as you can kind of see in the note, using the leftover revenue from Main Street Myers Pool to help continue fund that. Talked about Public Works fleets. PD, they have an annual cruiser replacement. Usually all their vehicles, it's usually about $50,000. So they're replacing one of their typical like SUV cruisers. In facilities, the 20 grand shown for PD is the using the existing reserves to do that architectural engineering renovation study. And the Public Works garage is replacing an existing boiler. As Councilor Oakleaf mentioned, though, I think there's some pretty good chance we can find a grant to help support that, though.
Yeah, it's definitely beneficial to ask early when you're doing some design work to really get a sense for what options are available. I know the timing, depending on like the funding source and the funder, you might engage later on, whereas with other funders, like some of the projects are beneficial to pull them in earlier for options. I had a question. Are there policies established around the condition of fleet vehicles when they're replaced? Like, is it based on mileage? Is it based on condition? Is it just years in operation?
Yeah, so typically what we do is, we have the master spreadsheet of all our vehicles. We have a useful life for each of those vehicles. So, for example, like our plow trucks, we turn those over every 10 years. That's our target. Our smaller vehicles, like our pickup trucks, we like to do 8 years if possible. PD, the reason they do the annual is because they only keep their vehicles for 5 or 6 years, and then they push their oldest down to a unmarked vehicle, so they keep one in rotation. So we do it by years.
Okay.
What we think that.
Yeah,
vehicle
I guess
lasts.
I'm more familiar at the state government level where it's based on mileage, which I think usually their threshold is 100,000 miles. So that's why I was curious, what our parameters are around, and it might be department, so I didn't know if it was something like that, where it's a usage, or if there's something more detailed about the type of technology or the features it needs to have, things like that.
Yeah, it is interesting because mileage wise, most of our vehicles have really low mileage because it's it's such a small city. So
Right.
our little EVs that we lease, I think one of them has 3,000 miles on it.
Yeah.
And we've had that since 2012. So
Mm-hmm.
something like that, we've been keeping it because it's still fine.
Yeah.
And we pay, I think it's $100 a month to have one of those. That's how much we pay per EV for those.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
It's fine.
Generally, years has been a good indicator for us when a vehicle is going to start to see increasing repair costs. It's one of the reasons why we do the PD cruiser every year. If we don't, we did 1 year where we skipped, and they saw a corresponding increase in their operating costs for vehicle maintenance. So we try and offset those operational costs.
And if we catch it before then, there's a better resale value, is that right?
Absolutely. And any resale value is put aside in reserves for use to replace that type of equipment in the future.
Thanks, Angela.
last couple slides here. So parks, calling this out, Riverwalk, that's where we have the capital needs assessment in. But this is the challenge of trying to find some additional funds to do some of the parks work that's in the open space master plan. So currently, given kind of where we are with the capital plan, we're not really showing much in out years at this point. There are some reserves that could be used to do some probably planning efforts and some little projects, but this area probably needs some funding.
Many of the reserves in this area are currently invested to try and build them.
And then that last table, the 48,000, that is the brine maker. So that is that tub and pump system, $48,000. The other piece of that too is when we were implementing this in New York, they didn't have like a smaller unit system available, so we didn't really pursue it here. So now they do have these kind of smaller units, because previously in order to get into a brine system, you had to spend $100,000 to get one of these units, and there was no payback on it. So that is another reason we're starting to look at it now. And that is the end. So.
Any questions from members of the public? Okay. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Let's move on to item D, on for discussion approval, assessors, errors and omissions.
One question, so does the budget book, is there like another tab for capital improvement options?
What do you mean options? Like the ones that are new to you tonight, or?
Yeah, sure.
Not necessarily to the budget book. We can produce something. I was thinking for now just to add it to the budget scenarios tool, or
Okay.
budget options tool.
That's kind of what I was thinking about. I wasn't sure if that was already in the scenario tool, or if there would be a separate tab for the scenario tool for capital projects.
We've just been sending that separately because there's you play with sort of aspect to it that doesn't lend itself very well to a hard copy.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
did we ever get you a hard copy?
Not yet.
Okay, I lost track of that. My apologies.
Who's introducing this item?
Well, it's supposed to be Ted.
Okay. Well, let's pause. He's not
but
here.
He's not here.
Let's move on to item E. This is on for discussion, introduction of unified land use and development regulations.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I am here tonight to introduce proposed amendments to primarily Section 4.4 of the Unified Land Use and Development Regulations related to changes that will address local historic, cultural, architectural, and archaeological resources. So this is an item that the Planning Commission has had included in their work plans since FY 2020. So we're finally getting around to actually putting some language together for this project. This is on tonight for discussion. We can, if necessary, have a second meeting to get into more detailed discussion. However, a lot of what's included in here, while there's a lot of changes proposed, most of it is process related versus policy related. So I'm going to go through and highlight some of what we're actually changing here, and then we can have some discussion and go from there. So the current regulations that are drafted and included in Section 4.4 are related to design review. As best I can tell, this is a hybrid language that's been carried over from a previous version of the land use regulations from the 80s, where we actually had a design review district, and then was replaced when the regulations were unified in 2016. So the implementation of it hasn't really been effective. One of the things that has been included is involvement from the state and review of specifically historic properties from the state for their authorization, in essence, to make alterations to those properties. The state has basically said over the several years that that's not something they do and shouldn't be doing, and that really the best way to protect local resources is to have local regulations. So that's really what we're seeking to do with these amendments. The amendments include both the draft language in section 4.4, some cleanup of references in the other sections, specifically 4.9, 6.2, and 6.6. There's some new language under Article 8 on the administration, really just to create this new Local Resources Advisory Commission. And then also there is an amendment to Article 10, which includes a map and list of the properties that would be included in this regulation. I think it's on the map and list, it's important to point out that all of the properties that we have included for the purposes of this initial draft are already listed either in state or national register. We have not included any properties that are not already currently listed someplace else. So the properties are already regulated in some form or fashion for their historic, cultural, architectural, or archaeological significance. What we're proposing is really in essence, what these regulations do is identify specific covered actions, and if one of those actions is being proposed, then these regulations would apply. If one of the properties that are identified are not proposing one of the covered actions, they won't apply at all. The property can make alterations or changes or do whatever they need as long as it's not included as one of the covered actions. If it is a covered action, then it is forwarded on to this new Local Resources Advisory Commission for their review, including specific application requirements. That information will be reviewed by this new entity for their recommendation on a certificate of appropriateness. So it would still be the zoning administrator or development review board that would be issuing the permit based on the recommendation of this Local Resources Advisory Commission. The rest of the text is really related to, again, kind of the administration of this section, how properties are listed, how they're removed from the local resources list, and things of that nature. So again, a lot of administrative and process-oriented changes, but that's a quick introduction. Happy to answer any questions right now or look to have further discussion at a future meeting.
As a reminder to council, this is the result of, initially our planning commission was looking at a design review district, significantly larger, involving a lot of properties, regardless of historic status. Pivoted to this approach that addresses just properties already identified as having historic, cultural, or archaeological significance. Which seemed more aligned with what I was hearing from all of you. As a point of process, I kind of suspect maybe not everyone felt like they could dig into these details fully in this packet, given the other meeting content. So I would suggest using this time for maybe general questions. Then there's an opportunity to follow up with staff with specifics. We could set a public hearing for February and then also use that time to go more in detail into what's here.
Sounds like a good way forward, I think.
Knowing that we can have as many public hearings as we want, we can have the public hearing, make more changes, do another one. But
Yeah.
I think the February date is proposed. If it all works out, we could implement something before a new council is seated, but if we don't, we don't.
And the commission, that would be part of the public hearing, or is that separate?
I believe that would be separate. That can be done as a resolution, the creation of the Local Resources Advisory Commission. I think that can function like we've done with other commissions, is that's just a resolution from council to create that.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, that's the commission itself is one of the probably biggest sticking points for me with this. It seems like I don't know, it feels like there is a chance for a commission to have a lot of personal opinion, and not necessarily think about what is best for all city residents. And I have concerns around, like, does it make sense for an inclusion and belonging ambassador to be on this commission? What does that then mean for the inclusion and belonging commission? I'm also worried about, with all of this, should it get an equity review? Because, while I can appreciate that, like, the areas highlighted are already on various lists, I don't know, it feels so, again, kind of piecemeal, and like there's a lot of room for potential bias because of it being so piecemeal. I'm also really concerned about how we're thinking about engaging Abenaki leadership in this. So if we're talking about historical and archaeological, how is our land use proclamation and land rights proclamation being incorporated into this document? And then how can we do our due diligence going forward in a way that works for city staff, works for Abenaki leadership, without being too much of a burden, and making it actually meaningful. So yeah, I think those are kind of my more general just concerns about different aspects of this.
Regarding the ordinance language proposals, I did check in with some members of the planning commission to see if there's any reservations about what was proposed for council to review. And it seemed like, as you note in your memo, that it was a unanimous vote to move this to council, and that doesn't always tell the whole story, but it does sound like from the response I got that the planning commission seems like this is a good option compared to where the conversation began.
I think so, yeah, from the Planning Commission's perspective, and not to speak for them, but I believe this is probably the solution that gets us to the best place the quickest, so that we have some level of local resource protection without having to do a full property by property analysis and survey independent of what's already been done and what already exists.
Go ahead.
I was thinking about what you had said, Aurora. I think the goal of this is to ensure, with these identified buildings or properties, the preservation of whatever is making the thing historic, cultural, whatever significant. And that the guidelines should be written in a way that they're applied. Like, basically, if you want to demo, redevelop, rebuild, that triggers this. You can do anything else. And then the guidelines would say, like, here's how you retain that historic value or what have you. I'm trying to think about, so theoretically, the guidelines should be keeping whoever's serving on that body within consistent application, similar to the DRB. I'm curious, like, what inequities you are thinking about that could surface.
Yeah, and this is where, and I mentioned to the mayor that I'd love for this to come up with more time to review without
Sure.
such big priority items, because I wasn't able to get as detailed in my own review.
We could table this
Um,
for the next discussion.
Yeah, and again, like thinking about, I think probably one of the biggest things with the commission is, again, then, and this might be a bigger question too, of like, how does inclusion and belonging fit if we start making more commissions?
And also, these two don't have to be taken in the same conversation based on,
That's correct.
yeah,
That's correct, yes. They can be separated.
okay.
Yeah, I included the draft of the charter just for reference so that you could see that a new commission would be established or should be established with this. And some of that is based in statute. Statute provides guidelines on for commissions of this sort, the membership as far as expertise to be able to evaluate archaeological, historic, cultural, and architectural resources so that there are some experts included. They do provide for allowances that those experts not necessarily be residents of the community so that we can pull from resources that are available to make sure that decisions are being made that are going to fit within the standards that are being outlined.
It almost has a sense of a board in a way, because of the particular expertise that's sought.
It's similar, yeah. I would say that it is similar to our development review board in the sense that they kind of meet when they need to on specific topic matter, and otherwise they're not informing on policy decisions for council. They're really more reacting to applications that meet certain criteria that need to go before them.
Yeah, okay.
Are there other broad questions?
In terms of the table that lists all the different properties, you said it was from an existing group of properties that are already historic for one reason or another.
That's correct.
I wonder, there's a few of them that are either unnamed or the year of construction is missing, the architectural style is missing. I just wonder if there could be some more explanation as to why those properties therefore are historic. Like, you know, the Colonel Nathan Rice house, I can assume if I look up Colonel Nathan, he was somebody of importance in the area, and that deems the historic nature of it. But for unnamed at 12 West Canal with no date and no architectural style, it's hard to understand why we would want to consider it as a historic.
Yeah, and I
structure.
think, so part of the reason why those properties are included is because, again, they're already listed. Most of these, the majority of them are in the state register. So in order to have a level of consistency so that we are not trying to evaluate properties without the expertise to really determine if they meet these standards, the Planning Commission chose to include all of the properties that are currently listed, and then as necessary, if the property owner would like to have their property removed because it's no longer significant, then there's the process that's outlined in the draft to be able to have that property evaluated for potential delisting. So, but as a baseline, since we don't have the expertise to determine what property should be included and what shouldn't, we made the decision to include them all because they're already listed someplace else.
And I totally get that. I just, if there could be a way that we could understand why they're there, why the state has designated them, you'd at least think that there would be a year of construction or something like that.
So I can go back and look at the surveys for those properties to see if there's any additional information that can be provided for those references.
I know that some towns, for example, Milton, like they, similar to us, have a lot of old buildings. The designation, and they have like a little plaque that Milton gives out to different buildings, depends on if people have kept that building up to a specific standard. Because you can have an old building, but if it's crumbling apart, the architectural value of it has then been decreased, and you rarely can renovate, and you have to knock it down in order to continue stuff. So I don't know if the committee had thought about anything like that, of an evaluation method or a classification method that we would use, or if they would just think purely just going off of what the state has said without any further review on their part or this new commission?
So, yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think there wasn't a discussion about any type of honorarium for the current state of the building or structure. But I think the intent was that if an alteration if one of the covered actions was being proposed and it got into that review process with the Local Resources Advisory Commission, that's where some of those questions would be answered. If it still does actually meet if it still has any significant contributing factors that would either prohibit the alteration or what was proposed, or should allow for the work to move forward, and then that could really kind of stand as some of the reasoning for future alterations or changes.
Okay, great. Well, this is a huge amount of work. I know they've worked on this a lot, so thanks for bringing it to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any questions, comments from folks on Zoom? Would anyone like to make a motion to set a public hearing for February 5th, at which time we could dig more in?
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Thomas, second by Bryn. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we still don't have Ted, so we'll move on to item F, conceptual overview of short-term rental ordinance.
I can cover the E&O if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, okay, then let's do D.
Sorry, Deb.
Errors and omissions.
So when real or personal property estate is omitted from the grand list by mistake, or an obvious error is found in the grand list, the assessor, with the approval of council, may supply such omissions or correct such errors and make a certificate thereon of fact. That's statutory language, as you can predict. That has to happen before December 31st, which is why we really need to take care of it today, even though the assessor isn't here. So there were 3 errors and omissions identified for the 2023 grand list. The net change to the grand list is a decrease of $2,008,000. Digit. $2,289,193.
I went up.
Lord, not 2 million. Good gravy. The 3 changes aren't really debatable. 2 have to do with transfer to a new owner, and the 3rd was a pure error in entry, unfortunately. The reduction in grand list from these errors and omissions would reduce tax revenue by $4,350.22. Would council be willing to approve these errors and omissions?
I don't understand the 2 KGR Realty Holdings ones that went down to 0. Is it like a duplicate, like a changed owner and we had 2 listings?
KGR is not the current owner of the property. That is the previous owner. They sold the property in January of 2023. They should not have received a tax bill.
Okay, I understand.
So the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I had a question that you may not be able to answer. It looks like there was a clerical error on the 3rd one, an accidental 0. Is there secondary review? Does somebody else go over any of this content for like accuracy? You know, like you review a document for grammar and spelling. Is there any type of procedure process that goes through to do some type of verification of data entry?
We are working towards that.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions, concerns? No. It's thankfully a small total impact. Do I have a motion to approve the assessor's errors and omissions?
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Bryn, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thanks, Elaine. Okay, now, Jasmine, please join us. Short-term rental ordinance.
Try not to use my hands too much this time.
Alrighty. Good evening, everyone. As you all know, I am here tonight to present the draft of the short-term rental ordinance that myself and the Housing Commission have spent the past few months working on. We are hoping for feedback and preliminary approval for the policy in theory before legal consultation commences. So I will first start off with some background data. In the past decade, the short-term rental, I will use the abbreviation STR, market in Winooski has modestly risen with the prevalence and popularity of platforms like Airbnb and VRBO. It was not until January of 2022 that there was a sharp increase in the amount of STRs available in the city. While Winooski is not large in population, the rate of increase of STRs shows a concerning pattern for our renter-heavy population. In summer of 2022, there were only 37 active units listed on sites like Airbnb and VRBO. In May of 2023, at the time discussions of a short-term rental ordinance began, there were 83 listings. And in November of this same year, that number had risen to 97. While Vermont's tourism fluctuates greatly depending on the season, there has been a significant increase when comparing the same seasons in 2022 and 2023. The current rate of STRs in Winooski makes up about 2.4% of the entire housing stock in the city, which in itself is not a major concern, but rather at the rate at which that number is rapidly increasing. So some pros and cons of the STR market. Positives brought by STRs in Winooski include additional income generated for property owners, diversification of income streams for property owners, tax revenue for the city and state through the meals and rooms and local options taxes, and increased vacation room inventory in a city with no hotels currently. Negatives include a loss of potential long-term housing units during a serious housing crisis, negative externalities like noise, parking, and trash, which are borne by long-term residents, and ongoing concerns of outside, that being state and Winooski, investors purchasing the few homes for sale in the city for use as STRs. So going through the policy development process, many other communities in both Vermont and Chittenden County have taken or are considering action by embracing new STR registries and regulations. As neighboring municipalities take action as Burlington has, Winooski will continue to be impacted. And I think that that is a large part of why we're seeing such a sharp increase in the past year. Through the policy development process, I have met with staff from Burlington, South Burlington, Montpelier, Chester, Ludlow, Morristown, and Montgomery. Their struggles and successes surrounding the development, implementation, compliance, enforcement, and legality of the policy were all taken into consideration. Although the potential policy options are expansive, limitations caused by city staff capacity concerns and budgetary restrictions have informed the policy presented to council today. It was determined by staff and the Housing Commission that the best path forward was by pursuing a policy as an expansion to the recently updated Chapter 17 Public Building Registry Ordinance. The majority of the staff hours associated with this ordinance change will be taken on by the code enforcement team, the city clerk's office, and the housing initiative director. There have been multiple interdepartmental meetings to discuss the internal operational workflow that this proposed ordinance would follow, and this policy represents the decisions made in those meetings. So, some of the specific policy elements that I will go through that are listed here. So there will theoretically be an added question to the public building registry mailer, which goes out every June, which will have individuals identify if their public building is utilized as a short-term rental. So all short-term rentals should already be encompassed in the public building registry, theoretically. It will then be the responsibility of the owner to submit a complete application to the city clerk's office to receive either an owner-occupied STR license or a non-owner-occupied STR license. So this proposed ordinance change would also allow city council to put a cap on total non-owner-occupied licenses within the city. It is the goal that this cap can serve as a regulatory instrument to stop additional investment properties being converted to SDRs while still allowing existing non-owner occupied STRs to obtain a license. It is a staff recommendation to avoid making existing STRs whether that be owner-occupied or non-owner-occupied, ineligible for city-issued license, both due to limited enforcement capacity for staff and due to ongoing legal action being taken by STR operators and municipalities that have taken that route. Increased fees associated with the license process were recommended by the Housing Commission at $150 annual for owner-occupied STRs and $300 annually for non-owner-occupied STRs, with an additional $50 for each bedroom over 3. So while there are only a few large bedroom count STRs in the city currently, the Housing Commission felt that this was just another tool to disincentivize the loss of large bedroom count rentals in the city. And those numbers we decided them as a group, but I had made a research document of other fees and fines in other municipalities so that we could kind of have an informed decision. And that's what was chosen. So I did put in the memo, it says, if we conservatively estimate a 50% compliance in the first year with a 50-50 split of owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied, the license fees could bring in around like $11,000. So I did consult with VHFA today, and while the data they have is flawed, it's around 50-50 to 75-25, with the likelihood that it is more non-owner occupied than owner occupied. The data does have a gap in it. VHFA is hopefully going to get back to me with more recent data. I have data from July, so it's outdated because we have so many more already than we even did this summer. But if we are looking at more of a 75-25, that could be closer to 25,500. So that money would go directly to the Housing Trust Fund to support long-term rentals and home ownership in Winooski. Any funds that are collected through the enforcement and violation structure will be returned to the code enforcement budget to offset any additional staff hours dedicated to this new program. The fire chief and fire marshal have recommended that short-term rentals be inspected on a yearly basis rather than in the traditional 4-year cycle due to the high number of people staying in the units who are unfamiliar with local requirements. So that was requested, and it sounds like code enforcement is willing to do the additional work to make sure that those units are safe. A proposed violation fine structure has been drafted by the Housing Commission as well, although legal consultation is needed to ensure the desired dollar amounts can be enforced using existing means. So the tentative fine structure is listed in my memo. Again, these are not 100%. We need to talk to the attorney, but we also wanted to make sure that there was support of the policy in theory before we go and incur legal fees. So that is the basis of it, but happy to answer any questions or concerns.
Can you define an owner-occupied?
Yeah, so we decided to do the homestead definition that the state uses. So doesn't mean someone has to file for the homestead declaration, but so that they own the property and that they're on it for at least, I think it's 1 day over 50% a year.
I would be interested in some discussion around the difference between me short-term renting my cottage and me short-term renting my own house, like my primary residence. I don't need to do that right now, but.
Okay, yeah.
And then I'll just share general support for all of this. Very pleased. All of these fees and fines are far too low, I think. This $300 licensing fee means nothing when I'm making $30K a year, right? We should be structuring the cost for an investor to have a short-term rental in Winooski to make it less attractive. And I don't think this does that. And then I also wanted to ask, I understand the rationale for an annual inspection, but I have some concern with that pulling capacity from inspecting actual homes of people who live here, long-term rentals.
Yeah, that was, so Bruce and, I don't know, Chief, if you're on listening. Very specific request from the code enforcement team. I had not considered that as something that would need to be built into this, because I also know that short-term rentals generally, because of the market, regulate themselves, so they tend to be in better condition, because otherwise people won't want to stay in them theoretically, or it'll get really bad reviews. But I do understand that there's high turnover and lots of new people that might not understand how to use a wood stove or might not understand the locking mechanism. So, yeah.
And are they then paying the same rental registry fee as everyone else but getting 4 times the service?
Yeah, because this is separate from the rental registry, so yeah, theoretically then yes.
I would think about adjusting that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if the chief strongly encourages a yearly inspection, that the cost would fall onto that STR owner for the additional. And we probably all wrote it down, but I definitely agree with Christine that $300 or even $150. I just looked up February, which isn't a really big tourist time. The Airbnbs are going for like $150, so they just have to rent that out a few times, and then they've paid for that fee. I've mentioned this a couple of times. I don't know if the commission talked about it, but have you explored taxing STRs at a higher rate than regular dwellings?
Yeah, so Angela might be able to answer this better than me, but I think theoretically we would need to pursue a charter change if we were going to try to do a tax, like a gross recipient, or a gross tax like Burlington has done. I believe that the reason they're able to do it is because they collect their own, but since we go through the state, we would need to follow something similar to what Montpelier is looking to do, which is doing an entire charter change to be able to collect the tax, which would be a whole thing.
Put that on your back burner.
Yeah, I think it might be worth
We
that
want to
discussion.
move this, but
Yeah.
that could be worth a future discussion.
Could I respond to the fines and fees being too low?
Yeah.
Right. So I would say that's what the cap is for. You're not disincentivizing creating STRs through the fines and fees. The cap would prohibit anymore. The fines and fees would be to make sure they're complying with our regulations otherwise.
The license fee should be a disincentive for creating new ones. Sure, we can cap them, but we already have a ton that are here right now. And this is a revenue stream into our housing trust fund that will help support priority housing. And folks outside of Winooski making money off of our limited housing stock should be paying into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I hear from folks is there's a concern with what exists now. So if we can make what they currently have not attractive through those fees, if they're going to keep it, then we're going to get more money. But if the fees are too prohibitive, then we'll get a home back and neighbors won't have to deal with everything that they're dealing with.
Yeah. I would like to see the fees be high enough that it helps offset, it's not just the fines, but the registration fees are also offsetting the code enforcement inspections, because not every inspection is going to result in fines. And so it shouldn't be borne by taxpayers to cover the cost for that FTE or half FTE, you know what I mean? Partial time position, to do those inspections, especially if the recommendation is that they're annual. I have this, similar concerns that have already been said, wanting to make sure that the registration fees, I understand we have a cap proposed. I have some curiosity of like how that cap moves around, like on an annual basis, since things aren't static.
Yeah. I think theoretically it could be adjusted whenever. Like if we suddenly are not in a housing crisis, which would be a fabulous thing to have happen, we could,
I guess what I mean
could
is
decide
like,
to change it.
say there's a cap of 100, and because we're government, we place that on an annual basis, but people don't live in static calendar years. So like, how does that work when there might be, some partial use of short-term rentals during one year you know, they're maybe not the next year, they may just like, I don't know, I just think of like, some of the competitive markets in the area where like, once you get in, you try and hold that spot, even
Yeah.
if you're like not able to do your best, because if you lose that spot, then you don't get it back.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about the economy of like the cap and how folks come in and out of that, whether you are within the registry or not. So I just have some logistical questions over how that would work. And it's okay, you don't have to answer that.
Yeah, no, we've had a few operational meetings because obviously this touches many departments and there are many steps in between operationally that needed to be determined. So we've gone through and fleshed out quite a lot of it to make sure it's, one, feasible with current staffing. So, you know, at this point, since it's gonna run on the public building registry, you know, the fiscal year, that we would be keeping it on that. People who have a license would be able to renew them. Obviously, they would have the first opportunity to do that. If they decide not to, because short-term renting is a little bit more of like a loose, you know, people decide to dip their toe into it, then they do a long-term rental. It's a little bit more ambiguous sometimes. You know, if someone comes in partway through the year, if there's an open license, they have to pay the same fee, even if they only use it for 2 months. We had decided, you know, people can return them to the city and then they can be used for other people who potentially want to utilize those. Yeah, the idea is that it caps it, so it's not just saying, you know, no more, it's, we don't want any more than what is here right now. It's more kind of preventative, if that makes sense. It's actually Eric's idea. But,
It sounds like setting the cap at like a percentage of available housing stock makes the most sense, and then
yeah,
being able to revisit that like as housing stock changes.
Yeah, and we can definitely do that as well, annually. Yeah, because the housing stock obviously will fluctuate as well, but.
So we discussed offering that as the logical, it would be more transparent, like why is it this number? But it's not that straightforward to figure out. And so our suggestion is this enables you to set a cap and then we can determine procedurally how to do it every year or with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that within the cap, the discussion on, you know, the difference between somebody who is living in their home and renting out one room versus somebody who's looking to come on and rent out a whole house as STR, but the cap has already been met. I feel like I would like there to be some lenience for that person who's looking to just rent out a room while they live there. I think that's a very different situation than renting out a whole new unit.
Yeah, so the cap is only for non-owner occupied
Okay.
short-term rentals. So I know it's a lot of words, owner occupied. Yeah, because we did have a few people come in and give kind of their experience of, you know, being able to age in place or, you know, afford their mortgage payment by having someone live in their basement or, you know, a cottage in the back of their house. So we did want to treat that differently than people who have investment properties, because that is a very different situation than someone who lives on, you know,
and it's a different situation for the neighbors. Like if the owner is right there and you know the owner, there's less likelihood of difficulties occurring with the rented area.
Yeah, I think going back to what Bryn was saying, like thinking about how do we set that cap. I think one of the things we've seen are people push, right? Like we talk about like that de facto raising rent, which kicks people out, that de facto eviction. I feel like I'm trying to put the words together. I don't want people, right, to like at the end of the year not renew leases because there's now room under the cap and they can make a lot more money on short-term rentals than on their long-term renters. Because people will do that and they'll lie to their renters and to us as to why that lease isn't being renewed. So I think maybe, knock on wood, we get those protections with just cause, some of those protections under just cause eviction, but that's something I also have in mind as we're talking specifically about this cap.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's why the tax is very appealing to me, because an opening may come up, but your property bill, which is already high, is gonna go up even more. You can do
Yeah.
it. If you do, the city will benefit from that tax revenue.
Is there, just thinking of like other unintended consequences, to your point, like, I've seen some news, maybe federal, I'm not sure, about trying to prevent, investments,
Mhm.
corporations from buying up
Mm.
properties and basically effectively doing STRs.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this proposed language is attempting to address that?
Yeah, yeah, because, you know, for example, Burlington's ordinance, we would not have the staffing capacity to not only enforce in the future of any new short-term rentals popping up or people who are operating without licenses, all of that, and then also retroactively go back and make sure that everyone who had an existing legal business is suddenly not operating a legal business within the city.
Yeah.
And I spoke with Burlington city staff a few times, and they've struggled. It's a lot, and they have a very large department. So
Yeah.
as much as that would be great to just put a kibosh on the investment properties, it's just not realistic for us. And so this was kind of our inventive way of how can we stop the investment properties while not making the existing ones essentially illegal and not having to do a pre-existing non-conforming use, because we felt that this was better housed through the public building registry and code enforcement rather than through zoning.
well, so we're setting a cap, theoretically, move this forward, there's 60 existing, we set a cap at 60. And then once a year, we revisit that, hoping that it's decreased potentially.
And you can, I mean, you know, if
We could probably revisit anyone, if it's structured where it's like
Yeah.
by resolution.
Yeah, and the cap obviously won't be set until we have an actual registry of the short-term
Yeah.
rentals, because we don't have that at this point. We have to use all secondary data through AirDNA, and that
Yeah.
was a big part of why, you know, the state level was trying to pass the registry, because a lot of municipalities we don't really have perfect data. And, I mean, I met with a couple of consultants, like technology firms that other municipalities have worked with, which are very expensive. And yeah, there's a lot that goes into getting that registry. So
Yeah.
I would say that the cap wouldn't probably come for 6 months to a year, probably after theoretically this was passed, if it's passed. And then from that point, there would be a gauge of like, okay, this is our number that we think we have, and, you know, the cap can go here. If people fall off within that next year, then I think you would be, you know, more than able to cut down that limit if you want, instead of letting it stay the same.
Can you just refresh my memory about the 30 days? Is that it seems like it's pretty standard adoption, it's standard timeline of less than 30 days, 30 consecutive days, is that? pretty much what you're saying?
The definition.
Yeah, the definition of
Yeah,
short-term
that's,
rental.
so that's the state definition.
Oh, yeah.
It's the state definition plus a little bit, that Eric wanted to add in.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the state definition, less than 30 consecutive days, for more than 14 days, per year. So if someone short-term rented their house for 13 days, that does not count. If someone, you know, short-term rented for 3 months, or it's not short-term rented, if someone rents for 3 months, for example, a travel nurse, that's not technically a short-term rental, because a lot of people have the concerns over
Yep.
travel nurses and their ability to still find accommodations. So anything over 30 days does not meet the definition.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I think there's definitely a balance with what you said with Burlington, and, you know, we don't have that capacity, but then thinking back onto our fees, like, I still don't want Winooski, like, our licensing fee, and then any penalties to still be less than, say, or, I don't know, I don't want to be attractive for folks leaving Burlington to come here. So making sure that, even with our capacity, are there ways then, probably with the amount of fines and licenses, to still disincentivize people from, deciding to invest in Winooski instead of Burlington.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm definitely open, I'm sure the Housing Commission as well would be open to considering higher fees. I did do research, 150 and 300 are the highest that I saw statewide. It's Chester. Everywhere else is lower than that. That doesn't mean that we can't be higher.
You are just denser, and our housing needs are, I would say, maybe greater than Chester. That's based on no information at all.
Yeah.
I have a question. Is it possible to limit the fees that Airbnb listers can charge? Is it possible to make it somewhat less lucrative to charge by the night than by the month or the 6 months or the year?
I don't believe we would be able to because that's private business, And Airbnb is very, they have a huge lobbying and policy team, so I'm sure that they have very
Even if we put something in place, I think we'd be at risk of a lawsuit, and then enforcement would be really challenging anyway.
Yeah.
We can't limit regular rent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question. Is there a risk, thinking of other unintended consequences, is there a risk of a property owner taking advantage of the Housing Trust Fund, updating their property, and then moving to STR?
Well, theoretically, if they were gonna use HIP, they'd have to be owner occupied. So, I mean, they could technically, if they're lower median income. They'd have to be income eligible. But yeah, I mean, that is something we could consider. That would be on the Housing Trust Fund side to make sure that that's a little
Just
bit more.
thinking again in terms of how we're setting registration fees, how we're setting fines and fees. If that money from the registration, STR registration, is going into the Housing Trust Fund, and then they're essentially taking money that is intended for housing quality, for property, long-term use and ownership and long-term rentals. But again, just some of the unintended consequences of is there a mechanism to either discourage it? I don't say we want to discourage increasing housing quality in general, but so that there's a different, I don't know, category. I can't, I'm just thinking on the spot, so.
Yeah, I believe HIP and CORE actually have affordability requirements, and I think that they probably do say long-term rental. So I think that shouldn't be an issue, but I can definitely go through and make sure that is explicitly mentioned.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it is. But for DPA and IRB, that might not be explicit.
Okay.
But again, it would have to be an owner-occupied situation, so.
It's a sort of related question. What is our current vacancy rate?
Oh, God. I don't, Rick might have the data for that. I don't have the data for that right now.
That's okay, because I was just curious, again, looking at technically 2.4% of our housing stock isn't huge, but given, I believe the last I heard was 1%, even under 1%.
The county is under half,
Yeah.
which is likely our situation too.
Yeah.
And if healthy is 5, that's a huge, that's
It's a
50% of 5%.
Yeah.
Right? That's
Yeah,
a big,
I mean, I don't think I need to convince that action is needed, but I think Burlington and South Burlington were closer to 1.5 and 2 when they decided to take action. And this is quite similar to the South Burlington proposal. Theirs includes a rental registry program, though, because they didn't have that previously. So they don't have any sort of additional fees for short-term rentals because they're getting a 110 on each unit now that they never got before.
Something Thomas said earlier, an owner-occupied unit, owner's there, looking after the place and the people, theoretically. I would consider not having them inspected annually. Feels like an unnecessary burden. And I do want higher fees on everything, and I think we can all agree, like what Bryn said, these fees need to cover all the code costs,
Yeah.
all the costs of the rental registry for these units, for the non-owner occupied. I would consider keeping the owner occupied one on the lower side though.
Same.
Okay.
I also think of other costs, police costs. I've heard from folks they've had to call police because people have been having pretty rowdy parties. The trash issue that the chief has spoken to us about. So those are two other departments that are involved with STRs.
Yeah, and this is a little bit more operational, but there will be a whole master spreadsheet that is part of the licensing procedure in the clerk's office. It kind of was decided it fits best there since they issue other licenses. But with other ordinance violations, whether that be trash, parking, noise, anything coming from PD, those would be tracked in that. So licenses could be revoked if there are party houses, we hear about those frequently, or things, along those lines. So it gives the opportunity and the power to kind of take action and revoke licenses, and then put them on a year suspension.
And would there be fines for complaints related to that, noise complaints?
Yeah, so those, again, I need to talk to the attorney. Those would potentially be, the listed fine amounts for like a noise violation. But we would need to check like if we could also do short-term rental, like first violation. They're usually broken up by issuing or operating without a license because unfortunately, just based off of how lucrative this business is, it just brings a lot more opportunity for people to act in bad faith, unfortunately. A lot more than in like your traditional zoning or other kind of licenses or permits. So it's pretty typical that that is a much higher fine for people who are intentionally operating without a license. And then other violations are, that's still a fine, but it's lower. So that's more like trash, parking, noise.
I wonder, going back to your question about what counts as owner occupied, thinking, if we do have the lower fees for that, making sure we're really, really clear on what that is.
Yeah.
Maybe even putting up some more guidelines.
Right, like if somebody spends their winters in Florida and they rent their place up here while they're down there, would that classify as owner occupied?
If they live in it, yeah, if it's their homestead, then it would be owner occupied, but if not, then no.
And remember, part of this is trying to be ease of administration, so if we're tacking on to an existing mechanism to check, then it's a lot less work.
Yeah, it's not as, some of the bells and whistles get cut to make sure that it's feasible for the clerk's office to be able to administer the licenses, and then obviously for code to enforce it. Yeah, but we did go back and forth for a while. We also had to go decide between language because there's also hosted, unhosted, homestead, non-homestead. So we decided owner occupied, non-owner occupied made the most sense.
Does this include an exemption? Like you don't count if you do less than 15 days a year, I think. That's what Burlington has that's how the tax thing works.
Yeah. So that's part of the definition.
That's in there, okay.
Yeah.
We're so into this. Is there any specific feedback that you could use that you didn't receive?
I don't think so. Do you think, I don't know if I'm supposed to ask them this or go back to the Housing Commission, but for license fees, what do you think, like 200 for owner occupied and then maybe like 500?
I was thinking more than that.
I'm fine with the owner occupied, or 200 is fine. Like, I would keep that low. I would go way higher though for non.
Well,
like,
is it possible to actually look at what the staffing costs are and then use that to say what would the fees need to be? So what, we're at like over 90 right now?
Yeah.
So say out of 90, say cap it at 100.
Mhm.
If we have 100 and we know that we need this many staff to do 100 inspections a year, what would the cost coverage need to be?
Mhm.
And can we like break it out that way?
Yeah. I can talk to Chief Audie. He has been out, and this was more of a recent addition, the requirement for the yearly inspection. So I don't know if maybe we could do every other year for owner occupied, yearly for non-owner occupied,
And I don't know if we have a sense for it's like a third, a fifth, how many are like owner occupied? And I know that's like, again, a moving target, but like,
50 to 25%.
so be,
Assume
do on the,
50.
Yeah.
I was gonna say more conservative. Say like
Uh-huh.
20% is
Yeah.
owner occupied, or,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
sorry, the other way, you're right, it's fine.
It's probably
Um,
closer to the 25 because just knowing short-term rental market, most of them are unhosted.
Yeah, yeah, so just trying to use those estimates of like, okay, based off of this staffing and this percentage of owner occupied to,
Mhm.
non-owner occupied, like what would that
Mhm.
need to look like for fees, registration fees?
Yeah, we can definitely look at that. At this point, there hasn't been any express need for like additional staffing or anything like that, but I do understand that it's diverted hours, so.
Yeah, and it would need to be padded, right? Because there's other issues, and we're still trying to get some revenue in the housing trust fund.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think we'd be comfortable with much higher
Yes.
than
Oh,
300.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, should we move on to item G?
One
Yes.
request. So there was a lot of different ideas just now, so it would be helpful to have it recorded so we know where direction we're going. It's a little awkward because
Okay.
of open meeting if you're doing it by email after the fact, but at least I would say if you're okay with the mayor writing down what she just said earlier. If you wanted to add more to that, that's okay. You
Well, let
can
me
just send it
summarize.
to Jasmine.
What we just agreed to. We want to have a clear definition for owner occupied. We want to see a significantly higher fee for non-owner occupied that covers the cost of code enforcement to do annual inspections and provides revenue for the housing trust fund. We don't want annual inspections for owner occupied units. Something about fees that I'm forgetting.
More frequent than 4 years is fine,
Yeah.
just not
Yeah.
annual.
Yeah. We're also interested in higher fees.
Yeah.
We would like to investigate taxation in the future, but that's not
Mhm.
explicitly connected to this.
And I think there are questions about the cap.
Yeah, some more clarity on that.
Yeah, I could put together a document at that point that explains timeline for CAP a little bit more, because there's a lot of theoretical situations. Yeah, so I think all of those are definitely manageable. The only one is the owner-occupied definition, because as Elaine said, we did go through this quite a few times, and the clerk's office is pretty adamant that we needed to follow like an existing definition that was easy.
Well, I think what we need is that whenever this is drafted, that it's very
Uh-huh.
clear to the reader
Okay,
Yeah.
where they sit.
okay.
And needless to say, we're very excited.
I appreciate that that you were able to dig into it this late after that big capital.
It's because we love it.
Yeah. It's probably better than the other way around.
Okay. Item G,
Mayor,
amendment, oh.
I'm so sorry, Mayor. I do see that Representative Daisy Brubeck.
Oh gosh, I forgot to invite public comment.
That's okay.
Please, thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, welcome Daisy.
Hi, thanks so much for this discussion. I may have missed it. Did you discuss limiting the number of units, rental units that one owner could have within the city?
We have not discussed that. I'm not sure.
Sort of did with asking about corporations buying up properties, so.
Yeah, so, I mean, at this point, capping new ones would be theoretically preventing that, because existing ones, even if like Mary's, because I've seen, you know, I think there's one person that owns, I think, 10, but we just don't have the staffing to be able to tell that person that those are no longer legal businesses. So theoretically, I don't think capping it for one person would make sense, because we would be capping any new for non-owner occupied, and any existing are going to be allowed regardless of how many one person owns, if that makes sense. So I think that this also gets at that issue potentially.
Does that make sense, Daisy?
I guess so. I just wanted to raise the point and make sure that the council took that into account.
Because could that be another cap that kicks in later?
Well, a different question is, has anybody else done it, and has it been legally challenged?
I'm sure someone else has done it. There's many versions of these kind of policies. Not in Vermont, but that doesn't mean we could. I would think that it would be very rare. So obviously there is like maybe the odd where someone stops having a short-term rental and we have an additional non-owner occupied license. And that would be great if it didn't go to Mary Sue, who has 10 short-term rentals. But again, it would only really be like a couple, but again, you know, each one is important, and I would rather spread the wealth to other non-owner occupied STR operators rather than the few who have many properties, because there are a few of them. So it could be something to look at. I'm not sure how much administrative burden that would be adding, but I can definitely like weigh that and see if it could fit in.
Yeah, it is an interesting question. So like, there's a cap of 100, and underneath that cap, no one can have more than 5 STRs. I don't, to your point, I don't know if that's been done elsewhere, what the enforcement would look like.
I would support exploring it.
Yeah, because it would have to be
I think the
new.
ones that exist, but for anybody new,
Yeah.
I think limiting that, having that type of cap, I think
Just
would
have
be
more
great.
questions.
We're saying explore it. Obviously, we'll see what the administration looks like.
Yeah. It's
Good
a fair
point,
point, though.
Daisy.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Did anyone else have a question, comment before I move us along again? Okay, item G. Housing Trust Fund, interest rate buy down program.
Okay. So, the Housing Commission over the past few months has been working on ways to make the programming available through the Housing Trust Fund more accessible and to increase utilization rates throughout the community. Due to current interest rates at record highs, serving as a significant barrier to homeownership for first-time low to medium income households, Opportunities Credit Union had suggested that the city offer an interest rate buy-down policy to ease the initial impact of these high interest rates. In addition to utilizing the interest rate buy-down program individually, eligible borrowers could pair it with the down payment assistance loan/grant currently offered by the city. The interest rate buy-down policy offers a maximum of $5,000 per borrower and remains a grant as long as the borrower stays in the home for at least 5 years. If they choose to refinance, move out, or sell the home, they would need to pay back a portion of the money as a loan, depending on how long they remained there as a primary resident. It's important to note that the Housing Trust Fund currently does not have a replenishing source at this point. So that is, any grants from the fund will permanently reduce the fund. That is why staff recommends piloting this program for a year. The city will have the option to continue, change, or end the interest rate buy-down program after a year has passed, based on the performance of the program and state of the market, because we could be in a very different market than we are today. So if approved by council, this policy language will be incorporated into the Housing Trust Fund policy guidelines.
Any questions?
I don't have a lot of,
Great.
yeah.
I support it.
Yeah.
Too. You have a missing parenthesis.
Oh.
Item C.
Thank you. That's useful.
It's very useful to have a writer
Always.
reading everything.
Where is it?
It's, I think it's the no repayment required. It has a missing parenthesis after that, so it's in the first sentence
Oh. Of the policy?
of item C. Sorry,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Is there any language, I'll apologize for not reading this as diligently as I should have to see if the answer is in here. Is there language in here that allows for first-time home buyers that currently live outside the city limits to access this fund to move into the city?
Yeah, it's not tied to if
Okay,
they're,
current residency.
yeah, it's just if they're buying in Winooski,
Okay.
yeah.
Because I've heard, that's actually one of the number one things I've heard is like, well, if I could afford to live in Winooski,
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
I'd love to live there, I'd love to buy there.
Yeah,
And so I just wanted to, again, refresh my memory that this is accessible
mm-hmm.
to those interested folks.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say, I know there's concern because it's not a replenishing fund right now, but just considering the current market, it's rare that a low to medium income person is buying a home in Winooski these days.
Yeah.
So I don't imagine that it will be used to the extent where we would drain the fund. But I think it is a valuable tool that is less common than the down payment assistance. We have the DPA. There are a lot of DPAs available. VHFA has one, Opportunities has one. There are a lot of ones that have a lot more money than the one that we have, but for people who would be buying in Winooski, they could pair these, which I think 10,000 is much more of an impact than 5.
Is there, this is gonna be a little bit of a tangent, so I'll keep it short. It doesn't seem like there are a lot of people that know about this opportunity.
Yeah.
Is there messaging that would go out with potential, water sewer bills, just to, and that, I know that doesn't necessarily go to the intended audience per se, but
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of different channels to
Mhm.
get the message out there a little bit better.
Yeah, so I think some of the hesitation right now is that we're reworking it, so we don't want to market a program that is in flux right now. We have been discussing, so it had previously said any bona fide lending institution. We have decided to change that to any city-approved institutional lender because we have the MOU with Opportunities specifically, and we would theoretically need to have that with any other lending institution, and that's not really like a just,
No. You can't
someone
just
would
turn
not
that-
be able
flip
to
that
wait for
switch.
that. That's
Right.
additional time that someone just doesn't have to wait for the $5,000. So Angela, before the budget, and we will pick it up after, has been talking to some of the other local banks to see if they're interested in us signing an MOU with them so that they can, because Opportunities does market the programs verbally, but if we are able to partner with some of these other banks who are local, then they would also be able to market. But right now, it's our program, but it's kind of an Opportunities program in a way, like because of the MOU, we just don't have it with anyone else right now. So we're hoping that we can expand that breadth so that, because by word of mouth is, very valuable, especially when people are going to get a mortgage at these banks. And so I think we're also planning on trying to access Realtors Association groups too, because Jessica, our housing chair, is very engaged in those as well. So try to go through it at that angle as well.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and it totally makes a lot of sense to kind of complete the reworking first, so.
Yeah.
I think part of the challenge is that honestly, the amounts that we're offering are not going to cause someone who's not in the market to go get into the market. It's really, so it makes sense to market it through lending institutions where they're already thinking about it and starting, and maybe I'm close.
Yeah.
And then this maybe can tip them over as opposed to like,
Yeah.
there's no way I can afford this. Oh, this 5,000 is gonna help me get it.
Yeah.
Yes and no,
Absolutely.
I don't necessarily entirely agree with that, I think it helps, but I also think, so like 7 Days does their roadshow where they have like a realtor, a banker, a lender, like, legal title search entity. And so I think there's just different means, like, of getting the message out, and I don't think we should put too much reliance on one. It's just what I'm saying. I think the lending institutions are absolutely a valuable and reliable source, but I also think a lot of people aren't even going to get to the point of, like, can I get pre-approved? Because I think the assumption is like, well, heck, I can't afford a down payment. Like, I'm not going to go talk to a lender.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, have we spoken to any of the local real estate agents?
So Jessica Bridge, she's our chair, and she is a local real estate. She owns a real estate company that has several locations. So she's been a homeowner in Winooski. She's owned a short-term rental in Winooski before. It's now a long-term rental. She owns one in Colchester. So she has brought a lot of very valuable perspective in this.
She, before Jasmine started, she offered to talk it up with the Realtors Association too. So
Great.
Yeah, and she's willing to present it in that group as well.
Nice.
Perfect.
See?
Because I feel like a lot of times people call and start working with a real estate agent before they even dive into the finances of it.
Yeah, or people who work around here just know, like, actually, if you're showing a house in Winooski, you can, people are income eligible, then you can offer this as well.
Yeah.
Or mention it at least. There has also been discussion of more widespread, like, resource mailer or coordinated effort for, like, housing resources as well. So again, we wanted to kind of get our ducks in order for this. I am still working on the HIP program right now, which I'm sure will come to you sooner than later. But yes.
But not in January.
All right, any public question, comments on this topic? Anything else from council?
Oh, that's great.
Do I have a motion to approve this amendment to the Housing Trust Fund?
So moved.
Motion by Aurora, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll
Thank you,
underline
Jasmine.
the fact that Jasmine's here is the only reason why we're able to do this. Opportunities actually recommend this to me in the first few months of me being here, and I just could not get here. So, your money at work.
Thank you.
Well, that is the end of tonight's agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Bryn, second by Charlie. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Last meeting of the year adjourned.
Wow.